Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Blagg family. Jennifer Blagg was born on January 8, 1967, in Oklahoma, USA. She grew up with her mother and one brother, and they were very close from a young age. Jennifer was creative, sociable, and enjoyed playing the piano and dancing. However, she faced a traumatic experience in childhood when, at the age of 12, she was raped by a family friend who was much older than her. This incident deeply affected her, and it took a long time for her to heal. Despite this, she eventually overcame her feelings of resentment, pain, and anger, graduated from high school, and went on to attend college. Her future husband, Michael, was born into a military family. They frequently moved due to his father's career as a colonel in the U.S. Air Force. Growing up in such an environment was challenging, but Michael was a calm and obedient child. Michael was hardworking and intelligent. He even participated in a program sponsored by the governor to study nuclear physics, for which he received an honorary diploma. He continued to pursue his studies in science thereafter. Michael achieved everything by his own labor, because nothing in life came to him easily. He later shared that during this time, he worked as a pizza delivery driver to cover his college expenses. At 21, he married his first wife, but after about a year of constant issues in their relationship, they decided to get a divorce. In 2008, Jennifer enrolled at San Diego State University to pursue a business degree. Meanwhile, Michael chose to follow his father's path and joined the Navy, where he became a decorated Gulf War veteran and helicopter pilot. After returning from a business trip, he had some free time to explore the city. He attended a party with mutual friends, where he met Jennifer. They feel an attraction to each other, and Michael asked her out on a date, which she accepted. They went to the movies and afterward decided to start dating. In 1991, Michael and Jennifer got married and moved to the quiet town of Simpsonville in Southern California. They enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere and made many friends through their church. As a deeply religious couple, they seemed well prepared to start a family, even though Michael was often away serving in the Navy. 4 years later, they welcomed a daughter named Abby. After her birth, Michael left the military and secured a high-paying engineering job with a flexible schedule, allowing him to spend more time with his family. In his spare time, Michael began teaching Sunday school, which he considered important. However, due to Michael's job, they had to move several times, which was challenging for Jennifer. She often felt like just as she was settling into a new city and making new friends, her family had to move again. Despite her struggles, but when Michael proposed moving, Jennifer easily accepted because of her religious beliefs. Their final move occurred in 2001, when they decided to settle in Grand Junction, Colorado. It was a small, cozy town known as a winter resort, surrounded by mountains that attracted wealthy tourists. In Grand Junction, Michael took on an important role as an engineer for a company in that city. He also began teaching at the local Sunday school affiliated with the church. The family was very religious, and friends mentioned that they prayed about nearly every decision they made together. By 2001, Abby was 6 years old. She was getting ready for school and attended preparatory courses at a Christian school, where her mother, Jennifer, worked as a teacher's assistant. Abby was kind and helpful, assisting her parents with various household chores. She is also very religious, like her father and mother. On November 1, 2001, Michael called 911. The police were called and, upon arrival, they met Michael. According to Michael, he had just returned home from work and was immediately concerned when he saw the open door, because his family is always closed. As he entered the house, he didn't see anyone inside. In the bedroom, he discovered blood on bed, which dripped onto the floor. He also noticed that his wife's jewelry box was empty and that her handbag was on the floor, scattered with other belongings. Despite searching the entire house, he could not find his wife or daughter. Michael believed they were still alive and thought they might have been kidnapped, so he called for help. Based on the large amount of blood found, the police suspected that it was unlikely Jennifer and Abby were alive. They feared both may have been murdered. Since the Colorado River was nearby, the authorities considered the possibility that the bodies could have been disposed of in the river. They thoroughly searched the area, but found no signs of Jennifer and Abby. As the search operation expanded, volunteers and search teams joined forces to scour the surrounding region for any evidence related to Jennifer and Abby. Additionally, relatives of Jennifer traveled to the city to help with the search. While the search was ongoing, forensic experts examined the Blagg family home and collected various documents for analysis. They discovered significant amounts of blood on the bed and several fingerprints, which were sent to the lab for testing. Detectives also interviewed neighbors to piece together the timeline of incident from that day, but the neighbors did not see Jennifer and Abby. Michael was at work during the attack, a fact supported by CCTV footage and his colleagues' testimonies. He stated that he saw Jennifer and Abby alive early that morning, indicating that the attack likely occurred before he returned home from work. However, Michael was not excluded from the suspect list, as close family members are often scrutinized in such cases. However, it was crucial to verify the details carefully. The police interviewed Michael at the station, where he provided a thorough account of the incident from the previous day. He mentioned that around 7 p.m., Jennifer received a call from a friend who invited her to meet the following evening. After that, they watched TV and prepared for bed. By around 10 p.m., the entire family had gone to their rooms. Michael noted that early in the morning, when he woke up for work, Jennifer and Abby were still asleep. They were scheduled to get up around 6:30 to allow him to take Abby to her preparatory classes at school. After that, Jennifer returned home to take care of her daily tasks. Her husband Michael usually called her several times a day, but on that day, she didn't answer his calls. Assuming she might be busy, Michael didn't immediately worry. He then called her friend, assuming they decided to meet during the day, but the friend didn't know her whereabouts. Michael then continued with his day. He assumed she was at home, doing the laundry, cleaning, and cooking dinner. As soon as Michael returned home from work, he sensed that something was terribly wrong. There are two things that make him feel unusual. His daughter, Abby, didn't greet him as she usually did, and there was no smell of dinner cooking, which was unexpected since his wife Jennifer had planned to cook before meeting her friend. The scene became even more ominous when he spotted blood and immediately dialed the police. To preserve the crime scene, Michael went outside and waited for the police to arrive. The detectives then took over the investigation, and their inquiries led them to Abby's school. They discovered that she hadn't attended classes that day, which didn't surprise her teachers. Apparently, someone had called the class teacher the day before, claiming to be Abby's father and informing the school that she would be absent. The teacher wasn't suspicious at the time, but they did recall that a man, claiming to be Michael, had made the call. However, when questioned, Michael denied making the call, which only increased the suspicions about him. Further investigations revealed that Jennifer's friend from church, Melson, had noticed trouble in the Blagg family's relationship. Melson reported that Jennifer appeared to be extremely afraid of Michael. Jennifer only felt comfortable meeting in secret when Michael was not around. Jennifer had likely been forbidden by Michael from having visitors at their home. On one occasion, when Melson visited their house at length, Jennifer became anxious and hastily asked her to leave, probably to avoid Michael finding out that her had been to their house. The day before Jennifer's disappearance, Melson contacted Jennifer to invite her and Abby to visit. Notably, she specified that Michael, her husband, would not accompany them, which was unusual since the family typically traveled together. Melson agreed but thought the arrangement was peculiar. It was clear that Jennifer had recently argued with Michael and wanted space from him. Despite the plans, Jennifer never showed up the following morning. Later, investigators discovered voice messages from Michael to Jennifer, in which he sent her well wishes and affectionate greetings. However, authorities suspect that these messages may have been part of a setup, as it's possible that both Jennifer and Abby were already dead when the messages were sent. This thing raised suspicion about Michael's involvement, but he insisted on his innocence. He even gave interviews to journalists, expressing frustration that the police were focusing on him, and even they overlooking other suspects. Michael said he was deeply concerned about his wife and daughter's whereabouts and felt the real perpetrator was still at large. He has offered a $3,000 reward for any information that could help speed up the investigation. The detectives remained suspicious of Michael's behavior, so they decided to monitor him closely. During their investigation, they discovered blood on the bed, but strangely, very little was found on the surrounding walls. Normally, blood splatters and scatters in various directions, but in this case, that wasn't the case. DNA analysis revealed that the blood on the bed belonged to Jennifer. Additionally, when the detectives applied luminol to the family van, they found several hidden blood stains on the door and inside the vehicle, suggesting that it had been used to transport the victims, Abby and Jennifer. Michael reported to work on the day his wife and daughter disappeared. An investigation of the house revealed 55 fingerprints, many of which belonged to Michael. Notably, 17 fingerprints were unidentified, and 6 of those were small to potentially belong to young daughter, Abby. Despite this, Michael claimed that he had seen nothing unusual and pointed out that it was normal for family members' fingerprints to be present in the home. As the investigation continued, Michael relocated to a different house and didn't return to the original one, even after restrictions were lifted. He chose not to clean and no return to the house, stating that it was too painful for him. However, this decision ultimately worked in the police's favor as they were able to periodically examine the crime scene. In interviews with journalists, Michael portrayed the disappearance as resembling a robbery, citing the missing jewelry and money from the house. He also mentioned that there had been a string of burglaries in the area over the past year, suggesting that his family had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. According to Michael, the thieves may have broken in while his family was asleep, inadvertently targeting them. He suspected that the robbers were provoked by something when they entered his house. Even so, he held on to the hope that his wife and daughter were still alive. He often referenced Bible verses when communicating with the media, maintaining his innocence when questioned by the media and the police. However, detectives were convinced that the incident was not a robbery, as they found no signs of forced entry. They believed that the stolen items in the house were just a setup to distract the investigation. The police noted that robbers typically target empty homes to avoid confrontations and complications. If they encountered occupants, they wouldn't waste time and energy brutally killing them. Instead, they would opt for a quicker method. In the Blagg family home, a diary belonging to Jennifer was discovered. In it, she wrote about having a severe argument with Michael the day before her disappearance and fearing that he might harm her. Although she didn't elaborate on the details, she framed the situation in biblical terms. The detectives were unclear about the argument and approached Michael for clarification, but he maintained he had no memory of it. However, the police discovered a note addressed to him, apologizing for allowing negativity to creep back into their lives, suggesting relationship problems. When examining the Blagg family computer, the police were surprised to find thousands of hardcore pornography images. However, Michael denied any involvement in the images, he claiming that his wife was trying to spice up their lives. A further investigation showed that Michael and Jennifer's relationship had been troubled for a while. Michael had initially hired an escort out of curiosity, but over time he became hooked on the services. When investigators visited Michael's new house to question him, but no one opened the door, despite his car being parked outside. After hearing the sound of running water, they broke down the door and found Michael in the bathtub with cuts on his wrists that he had done to himself. In his hand, he was holding a photo of Abby and Jennifer, a Bible, and a note claiming he was not involved in their murders. Michael was rushed to the hospital, where he received medical treatment and survived. During the investigation, the sheriff's department received an anonymous tip about Michael's van being spotted near Ridge Park on the day Abby and Jennifer disappeared. This location was only a minute from them home. As a result, the police resumed their search, focusing on a 60 kilometers radius around them home. The new search lasted for 11 days, but failed to yield any results in the specified area. Subsequently, the police obtained new information. Michael was suspected of stealing an industrial item worth about $500 from his workplace shortly before Abby and Jennifer disappeared. Detectives called Michael in for questioning, suspecting he might be involved in the workplace incident. Michael broke down in tears, fearing he would be falsely accused of his family's murder, but he did not confess to the crime. Later, he explained that his emotional reaction was triggered by the fear of being wrongly accused of killing his family. A colleague of Michael contacted the police and provided crucial information. On the day Jennifer disappeared, Michael took out the trash at work, which was unusual since it was not part of his job. According to the colleague, they normally took turns doing this task. However, on that particular day, Michael insisted on doing it himself. He reacted aggressively when his colleague offered to help. It now seemed clear that Michael was trying to dispose of evidence. On June 5, 2002, the police discovered a woman's body that matched Jennifer's description. The body was wrapped in some type of cover and had holes in it, with a bullet still lodged in her head. It appeared that the killer had discarded her body in a landfill. Forensic experts confirmed through dental records that the murdered woman was indeed Jennifer. They determined that she died from a close-range gunshot wound to the head. Additionally, they also was established that she was killed while sleeping, as a retainer was found in her mouth, which she only wore at night. Unfortunately, the body had lain in the open for 7 months, and as a result, the remains were severely decomposed, providing limited information for the investigators. Investigators found that there were several garbage sites assigned to different companies. After digging at the location where the Jennifer's body was found, they confirmed that this particular area was managed by the company where Michael worked. The police, considering this coincidence to be more than accidental, they intensified their search for Abby's body at the dump but were unsuccessful. Further investigation revealed that Michael had left the city without warning, relocating to a different state. Although Abby's body was not found at the dump, the evidence was sufficient to charge Michael with the murder of Abby and Jennifer. The relatives of Jennifer were deeply upset by the manner in which her body was treated, and they strongly suspected Michael of disposing of Abby's bodies in a similar way. The detectives were unable to find anyone who knew the suspect Michael well enough to approach. However, they then discovered that his mother was still alive. Since she lived in Georgia, a state he often visited, the detectives decided to pay her a visit. Upon arriving at her house, they were met by a man. He was identified as Michael, who was subsequently arrested and transported back to Colorado to face charges of double first-degree murder. Following Michael's capture, the search teams decided to re-examine the landfill area. They regrouped and brought in volunteers to aid in the search. Over the course of 7 weeks, they searched through 7,000 tons of trash, but unfortunately, they never found Abby's body. The prosecutor's office suspected that Michael was living a double life. On the surface, the family appeared perfect, but in reality, Michael was manipulative and cruel. However, his first wife did not support these claims, stating that she had never experienced insults or physical abuse from him. In contrast, several witnesses reported that Michael's relationship with Jennifer was troubled from the start, with frequent arguments even before they got married. Michael and Jennifer's issues stemmed from Michael's love for partying and spending time with friends, while Jennifer wanted to build a strong family and asked him to stop going out. Eventually, Jennifer issued an ultimatum, and Michael chose to commit to her. They got married, and soon after, they had a child. During this time, Michael was still serving in the Navy, which often left Jennifer alone to cope with postpartum depression and care for their newborn daughter. Although she faced many difficulties, but Jennifer never complained. However, the relationship began to deteriorate due to domestic issues. After that, Michael found a job as an engineer, and things seemed to improve. He also started teaching at a Sunday school. However, his fellow teachers disagreed with his teaching methods and views on discussing topics like sex and abortion with teenagers. His liberal approach clashed with the conservative values of the Sunday school, leading to him having to quit his job there. Following this, the Blagg family traveled a bit more before settling in a new location to start fresh. This move resulted in big debt because their house in South Carolina took a long time to sell. Jennifer was initially unhappy in their new home and frequently called her friends, wishing to return. However, since Michael was earning a good income and managing to pay off their debts, she chose to stay with him during this challenging time. Before the violent incident occurred, there seemed to be a serious issue in the marriage. A local law firm employee reported that a few days before Jennifer's disappearance, she sought marriage and family counseling. Unfortunately, she was turned away because the lawyer was on vacation. Jennifer revealed that she had been a victim of Michael's violence and wanted to initiate a divorce. The firm intended to assist her as soon as they returned. But she vanished before they could meet again. Although police searched her house, car, and garage, they found no traces of her blood. However, it was suspected that Abby was likely murdered because she may have witnessed her mother's, Jennifer, murder. It was believed that she was probably strangled, which could explain why there were no blood traces found. The prosecutor's office decided to pause proceedings to gather information about the child Abby. Without a body, proving the murder would be extremely challenging. Michael was released on bail and allowed to stay with his mother within the city while awaiting the hearing. Michael claimed he could not have killed his family, stating he had no motive. He insisted that family relations were good and mentioned he had been preparing for Christmas by buying gifts worth over $5,000 for his loved ones. However, no one found his claims credible. The hearings were scheduled for March 2004. It was believed that Jennifer wanted to end her relationship with her husband, Michael, who did not agree and became angry. The prosecutor's office suspected that he killed both his wife and possibly their daughter during the night, then hid their bodies and went to work in the morning, trying to dispose of them with the trash. After his work shift, Michael returned home and called the police. Jennifer's mother testified for the prosecution. At first, she supported Michael, but her opinion changed when she saw the evidence. She claimed that Michael had been abusive to Jennifer for a long time, particularly when he was drinking. During those times, he would often attack and choke Jennifer, sometimes leaving her unconscious. After 12 hours of deliberation, the jury found Michael guilty of murdering Jennifer and sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole on April 16, 2004. Although the trial concluded, but Michael's story did not end there. 10 years later, Michael had a chance to retry his case. Throughout the years, his lawyers searched for any possible ways to appeal. One major issue was that one of the jurors was blind, making it difficult for him to fully assess the evidence presented. Additionally, a female juror had intentionally provided false information on her questionnaire. She later confessed, explaining that her bias against Michael stemmed from her own experiences as a long-term victim of domestic violence. This affected her ability to objectively consider the details of the case, resulting in her vote against him. As a result, the verdict was overturned, and preparations for a new trial began. The lying juror was found guilty of contempt of court and received the 10-day prison sentence along with a $10,000 fine. In a surprising turn, the defense introduced a new suspect, a man named Philip Ruins, from Montana. He was linked to a series of brutal rapes, and both Jennifer and Abby were among his many victims. In November 2001, it was reported that he was in Colorado around the same time Abby and Jennifer went missing. Philip had a history of brutal crimes but had never faced punishment until now. In 201st, a new trial was held for him. This time, the prosecution called in an expert to analyze the crime scene. The expert suggested that the arrangement of objects in the house indicated a staged crime rather than a genuine robbery. He noted that the crime was executed clumsily and unprofessionally. According to his assessment, Jennifer was shot while she was asleep in her bed. The assailant then held her down until her heart stopped, after which he removed her body from the house and placed it in a van. Unfortunately, the expert could not provide any useful information about Abby due to a lack of evidence. Michael's family said he was heartbroken after his wife and daughter went missing. They all embraced and cried together, creating a deeply emotional scene. They found it hard to believe that he could be involved in his wife's murder. During the interrogation and trial, Michael remained quiet and composed, showing little emotion. The prosecutor interpreted his calm demeanor as a sign of guilt. However, Michael's lawyer argued that such behavior was typical for a conservative husband. Despite the lawyer's efforts, Michael was once again found guilty of murdering his wife and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, investigators were also looking into Philip. He was a convicted sexual predator serving 200 years for creating and distributing child pornography and for sexually abusing minors. Philip lured his young victims through his online forum. When police searched Philip's home, they discovered a list of victims' names that included Jennifer and Abby, with the date of the kidnapping coincides with the time of their disappearance. However, there is no physical evidence linking Philip to this crime, no fingerprints or DNA were found at the scene, and his handwriting did not match any evidence. Additionally, it is unclear how Jennifer's body ended up in the landfill, where trash from her husband's workplace was dumped. As a result, investigators did not believe Philip was involved in the murder of Jennifer or the disappearance of Abby. However, the trial against Philip Ruins for various charges was difficult. Many of his victims experienced significant mental health problems due to the violence they endured. Some faced substance addiction, while others suffered from persistent nightmares. Unfortunately, there has been little advancement in the investigation into Abby's disappearance, as Philip has not admitted to the murders of either Jennifer or Abby. Abby's body has still not been located, and her fate remains unknown. She could possibly still be alive. A portrait of Abby has been created, and debates are ongoing about whether Michael is truly guilty of his wife's murder or if he was wrongfully convicted. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was born on November 10, 1965, in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania. His father was Cyrus, and his mother was Melina Spencer. Since childhood, Frank loved active games and sports, which helped him maintain a healthy body and mind. When he was in high school, he demonstrated his special ability on the wrestling team and was recognized as an excellent member. Frank had a strong ambition in business and wanted to continue the family business. So, after graduating from high school in 1984, he attended a local university and completed his course in 1988. After his father passed away, Frank became the owner of Spencer's Auto Parts. The year 1997 marked an important event in Frank's life. It was the year he met Maria. The two of them were attracted to each other at first sight. Maria was known for her hot temper and daring personality, which intrigued Frank. Frank's friend Paul remembered that Frank had always liked strong and wild people. And he was a bit like that too. When Frank and Maria met, they had a great start. However, not everyone was happy with the relationship. Maria's parents, in particular, had mixed opinions about Frank. They believed that Frank was not the right man for their daughter. Furthermore, there were rumors that Frank's father had been involved in a gang and was even a hired criminal. Maria's father did not have a good impression of Frank. He even tried to prevent their marriage for a while. Frank's family was also not happy with Frank's choice. So, Frank and Maria decided to run away and rent a separate apartment to get away from their families. After a while, Frank's family and Maria's family were forced to accept their relationship. Family life gradually returned to normal. Maria and Frank got married and had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They then moved to a new house. During this time, Frank owned an auto parts business and sponsored race cars. He worked hard to provide his family with everything they needed. For Frank, his children were the top priority and driving force in his life. Maria initially tried to manage the housework and take care of the children. However, later, despite having a law degree, she became the coach of her daughter's soccer team. Her friends said that, unlike her husband, she was not really interested in the marriage. She seemed to be uninterested in work and family responsibilities. What worried her most was the financial issue. She liked to spend what Frank earned. Maria Spencer had a cold personality, especially towards the children. This caused many problems in her marriage. Her husband was frustrated with her selfishness and eccentricity and expected her to change when she became a mother. However, Maria remained her own person. In 2006, her husband decided to file for divorce because he could no longer stand her inappropriate behavior and constant scandals. He feared for the health of the children because of her unreasonable behavior. After the divorce, the relationship between the two became even more strained. A confrontation over custody was inevitable. Maria wanted to keep the children with her, but her husband did not trust her and believed that she could not take good care of them. However, not everyone agreed with her husband's views. For example, her husband's friend, Ron, believed that both parents were necessary for the children to develop normally. Frank's friend advised him to negotiate with Maria for custody of the children. However, Frank thought he knew better than his friends and continued to demand sole custody. Maria did the same. She also hoped to receive a substantial amount of child support. The conflict between Frank and Maria worsened over time. On several occasions, due to Maria's erratic behavior, Frank had to call the police for help. Maria repeatedly attacked Frank and the children, but not everyone believed this. In 2008, an incident occurred that confirmed Frank's accusations. After a fight with Maria near their children's school, Maria was arrested. The problem stemmed from Maria wanting to pick up her daughter. But Frank's relatives prevented her. The reason was that the two had made another agreement, but Maria changed her mind at the last minute. After the fight, Maria put the child in the car but forgot to fasten the seatbelt. When the police checked her car, they discovered that Maria's actions could endanger the life and health of the child. As a result, Maria got into trouble with the law. She was charged with disorderly conduct and child endangerment. In addition, Frank also accused Maria of stalking him, claiming that she had stalked him on multiple occasions. For this reason, Maria faced an additional charge. Maria could not be convicted of endangering the life of the child because the prosecution could not prove it. Therefore, the authorities decided to drop the charge in exchange for Maria's admission of guilt for disorderly conduct and stalking. Maria agreed and was fined $600. However, this event did not make Maria reconsider her behavior. Instead, she continued to act negatively. Frank's acquaintances and relatives increasingly heard complaints from him about Maria threatening and stalking him. Some of Maria's co-workers also said that she repeatedly mentioned that she hated Frank and was willing to harm him. For this reason, one of her co-workers nicknamed her Black Widow. Frank tried to stay calm and smooth over the rough edges, but Maria wouldn't stop. He kept trying to talk to her, but she wouldn't listen. Frank started recording every conflict so that he would have evidence in case something bad happened. He just wanted to live and work in peace, but Maria took it too far. In 2009, Frank tried to stay positive and eventually met a woman named Julie. However, Maria soon learned about his new relationship. According to Maria, she didn't care that Frank was dating Julie, but what bothered her was that Frank gave Julie access to the children. However, Frank thought that Maria was extremely jealous, and that was the cause of all the trouble. Maria then became very angry. In February 2009, she sent a voice message to Julie, warning her not to go near the children. However, the situation worsened when Maria's father was released from prison after serving 5 years for fraud. His reputation was already bad, and for Frank, this meant more trouble, as he knew Maria's father had a fierce temper. Many believed that Maria had inherited her fierce personality from her father. As Frank became pensive and anxious, his colleagues noticed it too. The first incident that happened after Maria's father Anthony was released was a robbery at Frank's office. Important documents that could affect Frank's divorce were stolen. The next day, Maria called Frank and hinted that she had found something interesting. Frank understood that she was referring to the stolen documents and advised her to return them. At the same time, he also reported the incident to the police. However, it was unsuccessful in proving that someone was involved in the incident. The detectives did not find any traces of the perpetrator. However, everyone suspected that Maria and her father were involved in the crime. The police also considered Maria a suspect. In the end, the investigation of the case was stopped. However, thanks to the intervention of the police, Maria returned the stolen documents to the owner. It is likely that these documents did not contain any important information that could be used in court. The situation between Frank and Maria continued to escalate. Frank's patience was at its limit after Maria repeatedly threatened him on social media. This was because Frank's children were still in contact with his new partner, Julie. Julie, on the other hand, remained calm and balanced, enjoying her time with Frank and his children. She tried not to interfere in Frank and Maria's complicated relationship. However, Frank was extremely angry that Maria had neglected her parental responsibilities. The arguments between the two continued until 2010. At that point, Frank sought the intervention of law enforcement. He asked the police to evaluate Maria's behavior. Despite the threats, Maria insisted that it was just her way of communicating and that she meant nothing reprehensible. Again, Maria's guilt could not be proven because her warnings were vague. In January 2010, a fire brought negativity to Frank. In a strange coincidence, before a romantic trip to the Caribbean islands that he had planned, a fire broke out at Frank's mother's house the night before the trip. Fortunately, no one was injured, but all the property was destroyed by fire and smoke. During this fire, witnesses reported seeing a car driven by Maria, accompanied by neighbors and friends, visiting the house at that time. Maria smiled and watched the fire before leaving. After the fire department put out the fire, a dog owned by one of Frank's children was found dead in the fire. Maria's actions crossed the line, forcing the police to investigate the incident. Unfortunately, there was no clear evidence of arson at the time, and the fire was ruled an accident. Maria then sent Frank a frantic text message, gloating about how karma had caught up with him and how her life had been ruined. She hinted that Frank could face more consequences in the future. Maria also began sending similar messages to Julie, Frank's new partner. When the police failed to act, Maria's aggression escalated. She became so dangerous that she openly threatened Frank and Julie. A few months later, a fire broke out at Julie's house. This time, the situation could have been much worse. Julie was home when the fire broke out, but she was lucky to escape by jumping off the porch. Although she was uninjured, her house was severely damaged and uninhabitable. As a result, Frank invited Julie to move in with him. Frank and Julie feared that this would only make Maria angrier, but they had no other choice. The police are investigating the exact cause of the fire. A similar situation in the past suggests that the fire may have been intentionally set by an individual. Frank and Julie live in a different district than the burned street, so they hope that the police will conduct a fair and impartial investigation. However, once again, there is not much they can do due to the lack of concrete evidence. However, the investigators did not give up. Julie hired private investigators to join the investigation, which pushed the inquiry in a new direction. During the inspection, 2 flares were found on the lawn. One was broken and lying nearby. Investigators also discovered that the fire had spread from the steps leading to the balcony of the house. Finally, after collecting and examining the data, experts determined that the cause of the fire was arson. However, the lack of direct evidence has prevented authorities from identifying the perpetrators. The suspects remain at large and have not been prosecuted for their crimes. The cold summer of 2012 marked a tragic event in the life of the Frank family. In June 2012, Frank and Julie decided to split up, but in reality, it was just a plan to distract Maria. However, this also marked the final farewell of the Frank family. Just a few weeks later, Frank was found dead. On July 3rd, Joe, a close friend of Frank's, decided to visit him because he had not heard from him for a while. Joe and Frank used to take their children out together, and their team was currently in an important series of matches. However, when Frank did not answer the phone, Joe decided to visit him in person. When he arrived at Frank's house, Joe became worried when he saw that the front door was slightly ajar and there were stains near it. His fear was confirmed when he entered the house and saw Frank lying motionless on the floor. Frank's face was serene, as if he had finally found the peace he had been looking for. However, when Joe walked around the body, he saw dried blood in Frank's ear. Without hesitation, Joe called emergency services. As news of the incident spread throughout the county, everyone knew that this was a terrible crime. However, the detectives had to take matters into their own hands to find out who was behind this murder. Investigators discovered many important signs at the crime scene. They found large pools of blood and drag marks on the floor, along with a clear shoe print and bloody gloves in the kitchen. This physical evidence was sent for analysis. The investigation results showed that the bloody shoe print matched the size of the gloves that Maria's father, Anthony, often wore. Furthermore, Maria's DNA was found on the gloves. Since Maria had not lived with the family for over a year, the presence of her DNA on the gloves was unlikely to have happened by accident. All the evidence pointed to the involvement of Anthony and Maria in the case. Both were subsequently arrested. Autopsy results and ballistics analysis revealed that Frank had been shot with 2 different weapons. The first bullet was fired from a .30 caliber sniper rifle as he stood by the front door. Forensic experts found a sniper nest about 115 feet from the house. The bullet went through Frank's arm and chest, causing severe and fatal injuries. The attackers dragged Frank into the house, where they fired a final shot into his head with a .357 Magnum revolver. Frank was already dead at that point. This action was considered an act of revenge, suggesting that the shooter harbored a grudge against the victim. Police speculated that Anthony shot Frank with the rifle. There were also some important clues left behind. Frank's car and dog were missing from the house, implicating Anthony and Maria. A review of traffic cameras showed Frank's car driving away from the victim's house shortly after the crime. However, the driver could not be identified. The car was later found in Sunbury, Pennsylvania, 27 miles from Frank's house and 5 miles from Maria's residence. However, no fingerprints or other evidence were found inside the car. Frank's dog was found 2 days after the crime when it wandered into a wedding in Dauphin. Thanks to an electronic chip, attendees realized that the dog had an owner. The dog was later returned to Frank's mother. The fact that Frank had purchased the dog after the fire helped shed some light on the case. During the investigation, detectives discovered that the criminals had taken the dog as they were fleeing the scene. During the time Anthony was stopped, the dog was attracted to the smell of food nearby and escaped. It then wandered into a house where a wedding was being held, where it was found. This helped detectives prove that Anthony's phone was near the venue of the celebration on the day of the crime, even though he claimed to be at home in Harrisburg, 12 miles away. It is possible that Maria was the one who put the dog in the car, but this decision proved to be a mistake. During questioning, Anthony admitted that Frank had asked him for help several times and that he had visited Frank the day before Frank died. This would explain the traces found at the crime scene. However, Anthony could not explain the presence of the pool of blood. His testimony sounded disingenuous. Anthony also confessed that Frank had given him the car to use that same day, apparently to justify his fingerprints at the victim's house. This would indicate that he had been at the crime scene the day before. Searches were conducted at Anthony and Maria's homes to find the murder weapon, but Anthony was a seasoned criminal and knew how to handle weapons. Therefore, neither the rifle nor the pistol was found. Maria also refused to admit her guilt. She assumed that the glove had been accidentally sent to her ex-husband's house, possibly because the children had moved it one day. Eventually, Anthony and Maria were released to go home. However, detectives continued to investigate and collect the evidence needed to solve the case. Meanwhile, Frank's friend Derek Reed tried to talk to Maria at a school football game. During the conversation, Maria confessed that the last thing her husband saw before he died was her face. This statement was strange and curious. The investigation into Frank's death received intense attention from the state attorney general. The attorney general was furious with the indifference of the authorities to Frank's reports and statements. The police also faced numerous complaints of incompetence, and an internal investigation was inevitable. However, the police's negligence in their duties could not be proven. The reason was that much of the information provided by Frank, which the police believed lacked solid evidence, contributed to Frank's tragic death. The public and Frank's relatives were outraged that their petition had not yielded results. Meanwhile, investigators tried to prove the suspect's guilt not only in the crime but also in stalking and other crimes committed before. In 2013, a major interrogation was held. At the same time, Maria and Anthony continued to claim their innocence, denying all 12 charges against them. Their unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation led to charges of providing false testimony. Prosecutors argued that the suspects had arrived at Frank's home together, but they chose not to use their own vehicles to avoid attracting attention. Instead, they fled the scene in Frank's car. By the end of 2014, Maria was recaptured. Meanwhile, Anthony successfully escaped. After being interrogated one last time, Anthony boarded a plane and flew to Colombia. According to the investigation, Anthony's escape was evidence that he was hiding his guilt. For 11 months, Anthony was on the run but was eventually captured in Buenos Aires, Argentina. After being arrested by local police, he fought extradition to the United States but was unsuccessful and was deported back to his home country. In the fall of 2015, Maria's trial began. She continued to deny her guilt and blamed her father. She claimed that she loved Frank and never wanted him dead. However, multiple witnesses came forward to shed light on her true nature, recounting the threats, stalking, and sabotage she had committed. After more than a week of trial, the jury returned a verdict, finding her guilty on all counts, including murder, arson, burglary, perjury, conspiracy, and menacing. Maria was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 50 years. Witnesses reported that she smiled throughout the trial. Years later, Anthony's trial began. Anthony was furious when he heard his daughter's accusations. He claimed he was only helping her but objected to the use of violence. However, the physical evidence suggested otherwise. Finally, in the fall of 2018, Anthony was convicted of murder, robbery, and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus 45 years. When he was sentenced, the 77-year-old blew a kiss to the prosecutor and the lead detective before cursing at the judge. Years later, Anthony sought to appeal, claiming his defense attorney was ineffective, which led to his conviction. His daughter, Maria, also tried to appeal her case. However, both Maria and Anthony efforts were unsuccessful. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Michelle Avila. Michelle Yvette Missy Avila was born on February 8, 1968, in Arleta, Los Angeles. She grew up in a family with a mother and 3 brothers. Michelle attended San Fernando High School with 2 of her close friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. However, their friendship began to deteriorate when they entered high school. Thanks to her beauty and popularity, Michelle attracted a lot of attention from her peers, especially boys. Michelle's prominence made Karen and Laura increasingly jealous. Afterwards, a false rumor spread that Michelle had been involved with several guys who were already in relationships. This malicious gossip incited violence against Michelle outside of school. The assault was so serious that when she returned home, her parents immediately charged the ringleader of the assault, Sonia Bon, and took her to court. Michelle was scheduled to testify against Sonia in court on October 8, 1985, but unfortunately, she never got the chance. This was due to a series of events that took place in early September. A rumor that had been circulating for a year, accusing Michelle of having had an affair with her friend's boyfriend, resurfaced and caused a rift between Michelle and her best friends, Karen and Laura. The tension started when Michelle started dating a guy named Randy during their senior year. However, Michelle ended the relationship after only a month due to Randy's constant partying. Not long after the breakup, Karen started dating Randy and the two moved in together. Despite his relationship with Karen, Randy still had feelings for Michelle, which Karen discovered when she saw him flirting with Michelle. Michelle rejected Randy's advances, making it clear that she was not interested in rekindling their affair. Michelle advised Karen to reconsider her relationship with Randy and find someone better. Karen was furious, and Karen and Laura decided to confront Michelle at a neighboring park, causing rumors to spread once again. Michelle tried to reason with Karen and Laura, explaining that she would never betray their trust and that these were just false rumors from the previous year. Witnesses said Karen yelled at Michelle, threatened her with a broken beer bottle, pushed her to the ground, and slapped her before leaving with Laura. This encounter occurred just 10 days before Michelle was murdered. After the incident, Laura apologized to Michelle, and they decided to put their conflicts aside. However, Karen did not apologize to Michelle until October 1st, when she finally apologized for her reaction to Michelle. Michelle was grateful for the apology because she missed her friends so much. The 3 friends then made plans to meet at Stonehurst Park later that day. On October 1st, 1985, Michelle told her mother that she was going out with friends and was allowed to go on the condition that she be home by 6 p.m. Michelle waited outside for Laura to pick her up. When Laura arrived, they drove around a bit before arriving at Stonehurst Park. where they parked and waited for Karen to arrive. A few minutes had passed, and Karen had driven into the parking lot with another friend named Eva, who had been sitting in the passenger seat. As soon as Karen had arrived, she had driven her car very close to Laura's car and had rolled down the window. She had started shouting at Laura, who had rolled down her window and yelled back. Michelle and Eva had watched in amazement as their friends had angrily insulted each other, but Michelle had had no idea what the argument had been about. The situation had quickly escalated as Karen had backed away and sped off, with Laura following closely behind. They had driven recklessly for 45 minutes, heading north of the city and into the mountains. Michelle and Eva had begged them to calm down and stop, but Karen and Laura had been too angry to listen. Finally, they had turned into a parking lot that had led to a forest. Laura and Karen had gotten out of the car and continued their argument. Michelle had gotten out of the car hoping to intervene and stop the fight. However, as soon as they had stepped outside, Laura and Karen had suddenly stopped arguing and had turned their attention to Michelle. They had rushed towards her, leaving Michelle wondering what would happen next. Michelle had tried to get in the car, but Karen and Laura had been standing too close, leaving her trapped. They hadn't fought physically with her, but they had been angry with Michelle. Karen and Laura had told Michelle that they had staged the entire drama to lure her into the woods, where they could confront her. Karen and Laura had accused Michelle of sleeping with their boyfriends and had revealed that it had been they who had started the rumors. Karen and Laura had shouted at Michelle, refusing to listen to her explanation. When Michelle had become confused, Karen and Laura had grabbed her, pulled her out of the car, and had forced her to follow a nearby trail into the woods. Michelle had been much smaller than the other two girls, which had left her defenseless against Karen and Laura, who had continued to push her further down. Eva had remained in the car during the initial altercation, but had eventually gotten out and followed the group at a distance. She hadn't participated in the events that had taken place in the forest and hadn't been sure why she had been there. The group had continued into the woods, out of sight from the parking lot. When they had gone far enough, Laura had stopped and turned back to Michelle, who had been crying fearfully. Laura had then punched Michelle in the face. Karen had quickly joined in, and within seconds, Michelle had been on the ground, beaten and trampled. The attack had temporarily stopped when Laura had pulled out her knife. Grabbing Michelle's hair, she had begun cutting out sections of hair. Karen had wanted to participate, so she had started pulling Michelle's hair with her hands because she hadn't had a knife. Meanwhile, Eva had watched what had happened without doing anything to intervene. After cutting and pulling Michelle's hair, Laura and Karen had used rope to tie Michelle's hands behind her back and gagged her. A nearby river had caught Laura's attention, and she had stepped into the shallow water, smiling tauntingly at Michelle and daring her to enter. When Michelle hadn't moved, Karen had helped her up, forced her toward the river, and pushed her. Michelle had fallen down the hill, her face hitting the ground, rolling towards the river with her hands tied. Laura and Karen grabbed the girl and pulled her into the water. Eva had witnessed this and had run back up the driveway. However, when she had approached the cars, she had discovered they were locked. Since Eva had been too far away to get help from others, she had started walking back down the trail. But when she had heard a terrifying scream, she had stopped walking, turned around, and had run back to her car. There, Eva had lain on the ground in the fetal position and had waited about an hour until she had seen Laura and Karen return, soaking wet and laughing. But to her alarm, they had no longer been with Michelle. Then they left the forest, got in the car with Eva, and returned home. After the incident, for hours later, Laura even called Michelle's mother and asked after her. Laura talked to Michelle's mother, Irene Avila, and made up a story about dropping Michelle off with 3 boys in a blue Camaro after getting gas. Laura claimed that when she returned, Michelle and the 3 boys were gone. On October 4, 1985, Michelle's body was found face down in a stream in Big Tahunva Canyon, in Angeles National Forest, by a group of hikers. They then informed the police. Upon arriving at the scene, police found that Michelle had been drowned in 8 inches of water. Her long hair was cut off and there was a 4-foot-long piece of wood lying on top of her. Police found cigarettes, beer, and men's overalls near where Michelle's body was discovered. Karen and Laura told Michelle's parents and detectives that before her disappearance, Michelle had been traveling with 3 men in a blue Camaro. This made the items around the scene seem more reasonable. This false information caused detectives to search for bogus men for 3 years. Irene Avila said she did not suspect Karen or Laura were involved in her daughter's death because they both attended Michelle's funeral. Laura sent the family a condolence card and $20. Meanwhile, Karen had been living with Michelle's family for a long time to show support and help catch the murderer. In reality, Karen just wanted to oversee the investigation and keep the detectives from suspecting her. She also slept in Michelle's bed and had dinner with her family many nights, while she herself had participated in Michelle's murder. Karen seemed haunted by the murder. She regularly visited Michelle's grave several times a week, covered her room's walls with photos of Michelle and newspaper clippings about the crime, and constantly visited the creek where Michelle's body was found. One time, Karen told Irene that she saw Michelle's ghost. Detectives had no leads and the case languished for 3 years. By July 26, 1988, Eva Carambolo, the girl who had unwittingly participated in Michelle's murder, finally decided to report everything to the police. She explained the rumors that had been circulating about Michelle, the disagreements between her, Laura, and Karen, their anger, their jealousy, and every detail of the murder she knew. It took Eva a long time to report the incident because she was threatened by Laura and Karen. They told her not to say anything about what she saw, and she feared they would kill her. Finally, in March 1990, Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The jury did not believe the murder was premeditated, so they rejected the first-degree murder charge. After serving 21.5 years, Karen was released from prison on December 9, 2011. Laura was also released from prison in December 2012 after serving 22 years. Karen attempted to write a memoir about the murder and her life in prison. However, the book did not achieve the expected success. She also planned to make a film about her story but faced opposition from Avila's family. This incident prompted the state of California to pass Missy's Law, requiring organizations that help publish criminals' works to contact victims' families about those works. Missy's story has sparked much debate about the impact of bullying, the complexities of teenage relationships, and the importance of fostering an environment of empathy and kindness. Michelle Yvette, Missy, Avila's legacy will be one of resilience and hope. We hope that her memory will inspire us all to stand up against bullying, support those affected by betrayal, and work towards a future where understanding and empathy prevail. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Kenneth Keith. Michael Hawkinsmith, 35, was born in Danville, Kentucky. He was a well-known pastor at a local church where he lived. After working at the church for a long time, he decided to work at a local pawn shop called ABC while continuing to work as a part-time pastor. After a while, due to the previous owner's health issues, Michael had to take over the entire pawn shop. Being an honest and helpful person, he easily connected with people. In his personal life, Michael was married to Angela, and the two had 2 children together, Andrew and Naomi. Michael and Angela jointly owned the ABC Gold, Games and More pawn shop in Danville, Kentucky. They homeschooled their 9-year-old son Andrew and took care of their newborn daughter Naomi. Andrew often visited his parents' workplace and considered it his playground. However, On the morning of September 20th, 2013, the Hawkinsmiths went to the ABC store. The morning went as planned. Dan Smith, a regular at the pawn shop, made a scheduled visit. Smith, known as the Gold Man, was known for buying and selling gold between pawn shops across the state. About 15 minutes after opening, as Michael and Smith were making their transactions, a bearded man entered the store and ordered everyone to get on the ground, followed by horrific events. Andrew, who was at the ABC store at the time, after being instructed by his mother, Angela, to hide, noticed the tense situation and quickly called the police to report the situation. 6 minutes after the alarm call, the police arrived at the scene of the murder. When they entered the building, they found a large trail of blood that led them to Michael Hawkinsmith. They then found his wife, Angela, 38, and another victim, Dan Smith, 60, a broker, on the other side of the counter. All three victims had suffered serious injuries from gunshot wounds to the head and torso. Police later found Andrew, 9, and Naomi, 14 months, hiding in a closet. Andrew and Naomi had been through unimaginable horror and were orphaned, having lost both their parents. When examining the crime scene, police found 14 spent shell casings and 3 intact bullets, along with a briefcase belonging to Dan Smith. Remarkably, the victim's personal belongings and all the cash in the cash register were untouched, suggesting that robbery was not the motive. The case was complicated by the lack of surveillance cameras at the pawn shop. Therefore, police had to search for potential witnesses. An employee of Rainbow Cleaners, a nearby dry cleaner, provided vital information when he described a vehicle that had been parked near the building that morning. The vehicle was a silver pickup truck driven by a large man with a bushy beard. While one team of investigators searched the area, another team had to notify the victims' closest relatives of the tragedy. Michael's parents were devastated by the news. However, they also felt blessed to know that their grandchildren, Andrew and Naomi, had survived. The tragic news reached the daughter of the third victim, Dan Smith. Dan Smith was involved in the purchase of precious metals and was well versed in the specifics of his job, which made it easy for him to find common ground with different people. His business involved handling large amounts of cash, sometimes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. This led police to suspect that Dan Smith may have been the criminal's primary target. Through surveillance, police discovered that before going to the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop, Dan Smith had gone to the Lawson Jewelry Store in Harrodsburg, 10 miles northeast of Danville. Inside the jewelry store, investigators found a surveillance camera mounted on the far wall that was monitoring every customer who entered and exited the store. Their goal was to determine if anyone was following Dan Smith. At 8:16 a.m., Dan Smith entered the store, and there were no other customers in the building at the time. Dan Smith was carrying a briefcase identical to the one later found at the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop. After greeting the woman behind the counter with a smile, he walked toward the back of the store. Moments later, Dan Smith reappeared in the footage, exiting the back of the store, chatting briefly with an elderly woman who had just entered, and then leaving immediately. Footage from the exterior camera did not show anything suspicious. The police could do nothing but monitor the man, unaware that he would soon be at the center of a tragic event. Meanwhile, Andrew Hawkinsmith was brought to the police station to testify. Andrew told the story of how he was at the pawn shop with his parents when Dan Smith came in with a bag full of money. While Michael and Dan were talking, a stranger walked in and demanded the bag of money immediately. According to Andrew, Dan Smith immediately gave the stranger his bag of money. Andrew said that his father asked the man to stop, but the man also shot his father with a handgun similar to the one Andrew often played with. After that, his mother instructed him to take his younger sister, Naomi, to the back of the store and hide in the closet. Andrew picked up his sister and hid. At that moment, the criminal pointed the gun at Angela. The 9-year-old boy thought the reason the stranger did this might be because of the money. The boy described the stranger as a very tall man with a fake-looking blonde beard, which matched the description given by a witness from Rainbow Cleaners. In investigating the case, police thoroughly investigated the business run by the Hawkinsmith family. They discovered that the ABC Gold Games and More pawn shop had a different owner, Steve Devine. Although he usually attended Friday transactions with Dan Smith, he was absent on the morning of September 20th. This information raised concerns, making determining his whereabouts a top priority. Steve Devine explained that he had an allergic reaction that morning and had to cancel all his appointments. His wife confirmed this story. The alibi and the fact that Steve Devine did not own a silver pickup truck helped eliminate him as a suspect. Steve Devine also explained why there were no surveillance cameras in the pawn shop. According to him, the security system had been removed by the previous owner, Kenneth Allen Keith. The new owner had yet to install a replacement. Kenneth Allen Keith, 48, is a pastor like Michael Hawkinsmith. He sold the pawn shop after being diagnosed with brain cancer. However, he is still the owner of another similar establishment, Gold Rush Buyers, in Pulaski County, near Danville's Bowles district. Their friendship began when Michael worked at a church youth camp and lasted 15 years. The Hawkinsmiths respected Pastor Kenneth, and he was like a beloved uncle to Andrew. With no significant leads, investigators decided to search the street surveillance systems near ABC Gold Games and More and other pawn shops. They found a camera on the office building of the real estate company Danville Rentals. Surveillance footage captured a silver pickup truck at 8:45 a.m., but the image was too blurry to determine the license plate or make. However, eyewitness testimony from Rainbow Cleaners helped police identify the vehicle. The witness described the vehicle as an older model with a distinctive square body shape. The vehicle in the video also clearly showed a square rear bumper that matched this description. The color, type, and shape of the vehicle all suggested that police had found the vehicle of the criminal. They continued to search surveillance systems farther and farther away from the pawn shop. Finally, at 8:17 a.m., cameras at the local Ephraim McDowell Hospital captured the same vehicle. Investigators were able to determine that it was a silver Dodge pickup truck. Dan Smith's family was also devastated by the loss of their loved one. Despite their grief, they attended the funeral and held back their anger. In search of more clues, the Danville police asked the public to come forward with any information about the crime or the vehicle involved. On September 24th, the police received the call from Tracy Hurl, a pastor in Warren, Michigan. He claimed to be a friend of Kenneth Keith and said that in their last conversation, they had discussed the Danville murders. At that point, Kenneth seemed to have changed. Pastor Kenneth Allen informed Tracy that on that particular day, he was driving to Danville to pick up medication for his wife. Kenneth also expressed guilt over what had happened, as he had given Michael Hawkinsmith the opportunity to become the owner of his former business. It turned out Kenneth's relationship with the Hawkinsmith family was not what people thought. Tracy recounted that in a conversation with Kenneth said that Michael was a fraud and that Michael had done everything to take over the business from him. These statements aroused suspicion, leading to Kenneth being named a suspect. To verify Kenneth's alibi, investigators decided to review surveillance footage from the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, where Kenneth said he had purchased medication for his wife at 9:24 a.m. According to the surveillance footage, a man entered the pharmacy. It was Kenneth. But just a few minutes earlier, the man was not wearing a green jacket or a beard, which were easily identifiable features of an attacker. However, this did not rule out the possibility that Kenneth was involved in the attack. There was a 6-minute gap between Andrew Hawkinsmith's call to the police and Kenneth's arrival at the pharmacy. The police decided to check whether it was possible to travel from the crime scene to the Good Neighbor Pharmacy in such a short time. They found that the trip took about 5 minutes, so Kenneth could have committed the murder, quickly gotten in the car, and gone to the pharmacy to establish a solid alibi. In addition, the main clue was that Kenneth had an unregistered 2008 Dodge pickup truck, silver in color. However, all the evidence found was circumstantial and not enough to make an arrest. So the investigators asked Tracy Hurl to participate in a series of fake phone calls aimed at Kenneth. Fortunately, Tracy agreed. During these calls, Kenneth finally revealed his true feelings towards the Hawkinsmith family. Everyone had been waiting for this to happen. Kenneth began discussing details of the case that had not been made public. Kenneth said that he was in Danville, but he was at the pharmacy. Kenneth confirmed that he was standing in the pharmacy while all this was happening. Kenneth then explained that he had left Danville and returned to Somerset. He then drove to the car wash to prepare for a planned family vacation. At 10:50 a.m., Kenneth was seen on camera walking down the hallway to the cash register with a noticeable smile. Exterior camera footage covering the parking lot showed Pastor Kenneth leaving the car wash in the same silver Dodge at 11:25 a.m., matching all previous images captured by various surveillance systems in Danville. At that point, they had enough evidence to arrest Kenneth. However, when he was offered a lie detector test to clarify his role in the case, he reacted in an unusual way. He claimed that he would not be able to pass a lie detector test because, during his military service, he had performed some special missions that involved killing a number of people. Investigators then executed a search warrant at Kenneth Allen Keith's pawn shop and discovered some important evidence. They found a fake beard and a significant amount of cash without any legal explanation as to how he had obtained it. In particular, they also found bundles of money wrapped in a ribbon with the name of the bank that issued them, indicating that Dan Smith was a customer. Further investigation revealed that the money found in Keith's pawn shop had recently been withdrawn from the account of a deceased broker. This raised suspicions about Keith's involvement in the case. In addition, investigators also found several .22 caliber shell casings in Keith's pawn shop. After ballistic analysis, they discovered that these casings had been fired from the same type of weapon used to shoot Andrew and Naomi's parents. Kenneth Allen Keith was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and robbery. He believed that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine were conspiring to remove him from the business. However, there was no evidence that Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine were involved in any conspiracy. When Kenneth met Dan Smith at the pawn shop, he tried to create a fake plan to make the police think that the case was a robbery. However, the plan failed when the police investigated and found no evidence of suspicious activities by Michael Hawkinsmith and Steve Dine. On September 20th, Kenneth arrived in Danville in his silver Dodge Caravan. He circled the pawn shop until he saw Dan Smith's car parked nearby. Kenneth then killed Dan Smith, Michael Hawkinsmith, and Angela Hawkinsmith. After taking all the cash, Kenneth calmly left the crime scene and stopped at the Good Neighbor Pharmacy, which was captured on surveillance cameras, creating a false alibi. Kenneth's decision to have his car washed appears to have been another attempt to remove any evidence that might have been left on the car. Prior to sentencing, in 2017, Kenneth Allen Keith pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Ardith Wood. Ardith Wood, a 27-year-old woman, is a beautiful and extremely intelligent girl. She was a PhD candidate in philosophy at Waterloo University and worked as an editor for a philosophy journal. Ardith is about to achieve his long-held dream of becoming a professor. In the summer of 2003, Ardith visited her family in Ottawa, Canada. She spends time happily with her loved ones, going for walks and cooking together. On August 6th, Ardith went for a morning jog. When she returned home, she found her parents had thoughtfully prepared a delicious breakfast for her. With the warm weather, Ardith decided to borrow her brother's bike and go for a ride. She promised to return in a couple of hours. Her mother planned to go shopping before lunch, expecting Ardith to be back by then. Ardith cycled on a trail that wound through the forest, along the river, and past cliffs. The route was usually peaceful and safe, but on this day, something very bad happened. Ardith failed to return home, leaving her mother worried. A heavy downpour began, adding to the concern. The woman realized her daughter wouldn't be riding her bike in the bad weather, but as time passed and Ardith didn't return, the family began to search for her. They thought she might have fallen off her bike and needed help. Since the city has many bike paths, they weren't sure which one she chose. They had to search the entire town. Despite their efforts, they found nothing, and when night fell, they went to the police station. The bad weather forced them to postpone the search until the next morning. The next day there was still no news of Ardith, prompting police to launch the largest search operation in Ottawa history. The massive search operation involved around 1,000 people, including rescue teams, police officers, dog handlers and trained dogs, helicopters, and a large number of volunteers. Ardith's family joined the search, putting up posters with her photo all over the city. However, the first few days showed no progress. The police then asked the public for help. Before long, a local resident called in, saying that on the day Ardith disappeared, she was on the bike path in the forest and saw a suspicious man with a bicycle. A young man with a pleasant appearance, well-dressed but acting suspiciously, was described by the witness. His behavior was frightening, as he had attempted to push a girl off her bike and drag her into the bushes. Fortunately, others arrived on the scene, and the perpetrator fell behind, allowing the girl to escape quickly. Following this incident, the girl no longer felt safe walking or cycling alone. The incident occurred in a Green Creek area, and she suspected the stranger may have also attacked Ardith. The witness was asked to create a composite sketch at the police station. The suspect was described as a light-skinned, dark-haired young man with a beard and glasses, aged 20 to 30 years old. He was athletically built. However, when the sketch was shown to Ardith's family, they did not recognize anyone familiar to Ardith. The sketch's features, such as glasses and a beard, were common at the time, making it difficult to pinpoint a specific individual. The investigators decided not to share Ardith's picture with the media, as they were concerned it would trigger a flood of misleading tips. Instead, police showed her photo to local residents. Believing someone must have seen her due to her striking appearance, they believed it was likely that a witness had seen her and could offer a valuable clue. Their assumption proved correct when 16-year-old Laura called the police. Laura said she saw Ardith on the bike trail on the same day that Ardith went missing. Laura was riding her bicycle and noticed Ardith sitting on a rock, appearing to rest. As Laura continued on, she heard a scream and turned to see Ardith arguing with a man. Laura was unsure what to make of the situation, thinking it might be a lover's quarrel. Ardith didn't seem to be calling for help, and Ardith eventually followed the man into the woods. Laura wanted to know what was happening but was scared by an approaching storm, and she quickly rode home. As Laura was leaving, she thought she heard a scream. The police asked her to come to the station to look at a composite sketch of a suspect. She recognized the person in the sketch. According to Laura, the incident occurred around 10 p.m. at Green Creek. After that, the police received several more calls from girls who had encountered the same creepy guy on the trail. He had attacked them, but they were lucky enough to escape. There was one particular call from one woman that was especially noteworthy. She described how an attractive stranger approached her while she was walking. They had a pleasant conversation at first, but then his behavior changed drastically. The man started grabbing her, but the woman was able to push him away with her bicycle and quickly flee. She didn't look back, fearing he would catch up to her. When she got home, she told her family about the incident and warned them to stay away from that area. Strangely, none of the girls who were attacked had reported the incidents to the police. The search for the suspect focused on the creek area. Soon, the police found Ardith's bicycle, which suggested they were on the right track. Meanwhile, investigators received an anonymous call that would prove to be a crucial breakthrough in the case. He reveals that a terrible incident happened in the forest, and alarmingly, he was involved in it. He said he didn't mean to hurt or kill anyone, but when he panicked, he hid the body. The man explained that he moved Ardith over a creek, made a shallow hole, and put her in it, hiding the spot with branches. Then, he quickly hung up the phone. The police were able to locate the source of the call, which was a phone booth situated 20 minutes away from Ottawa. The police quickly arrived, looking for witnesses or collecting evidence such as fingerprints or DNA from the anonymous caller. However, upon arrival, they were met with disappointment. The handset had been thoroughly wiped clean, and no eyewitnesses or surveillance cameras were found. The search for Ardith continued in Green Creek with the aid of specially trained dogs that could detect the scent of human remains. With the assistance of the dogs, the investigators located Ardith's grave, situated between two trees in a secluded, picturesque area. As the detective approached, they saw the partially buried, naked body of Ardith. Perhaps the criminal panicked after being seen by someone, leading to a hasty burial of Ardith. Upon examining the crime scene, criminologists found no fingerprints or DNA evidence. Medical examiners confirmed the cause of death as drowning, with algae present in Ardith's lungs, indicating she was alive when submerged in water. Despite the body being discovered naked, there were no definitive signs of rape, although the possibility was not ruled out. The police suspected the crime was sexually motivated, as the perpetrator targeted girls in secluded areas. Detectives were concerned that the suspect might commit again crime, so they had to quickly find and arrest him. The police thought the perpetrator had already assaulted several girls and killed Ardith, so they were determined to stop them from hurting anyone else. To expedite the investigation, authorities released a composite sketch of the suspect to the media, soliciting public assistance in identifying the individual. The response yielded approximately 4,000 leads, which investigators meticulously processed, a time-consuming task. A pivotal development emerged on September 10th, when police disclosed that the suspect had a distinctive eagle tattoo on his left shoulder, as reported by the girls who encountered him in the forest. A crucial lead emerged that could potentially track down the perpetrator. The media released a sketch of the tattoo, leading to several calls to the police from individuals reporting acquaintances with bird tattoos on various body parts. Unfortunately, these tips didn't yield any concrete results. However, in April 2004, investigators stumbled upon a significant clue while processing another batch of calls. A man claimed to know the killer, stating that the individual lived in the area and was seen riding a bicycle in the Green Creek vicinity around the time of the crime. Intrigued, detectives invited he for questioning. Upon arriving at the police station, investigators were astonished to find that the individual matched the perpetrator's description in both appearance and age. During the conversation, the young man displayed visible nervousness, stating that he frequently rode his bike along the trail without understanding the issue at hand. When asked to reveal his shoulder, an eagle tattoo was discovered, sparking further interest from the authorities. The investigation revealed that the man had a prior history of run-ins with the law, making him the prime suspect. During the 3-hour interrogation, he responded to questions with hostility and aggression. At one point, he described himself as unpredictable, like a scorpion under a rock. Despite lacking an alibi for the day of Ardith's disappearance, he denied any involvement in her murder. However, due to insufficient evidence, the suspect was released, but the police kept him under surveillance. Weeks later, he was brought in for questioning again. This time, the detectives were better prepared, having gathered more information about him. They also suggested he take a polygraph test, which he agreed to and surprisingly passed. Consequently, the police were left with no alternative but to dismiss the suspicions against him. With the investigation stalled, the Ottawa police offered a $50,000 reward for any information that would help solve the case, the largest reward ever offered in similar circumstances. The response was extremely strong, with approximately 5,000 calls received, each providing a potential lead for the police to investigate. The investigator became interested in a tip about Christopher Myers, a 25-year-old janitor who had previously been convicted of selling illegal substances. Colleagues described Christopher as quiet and non-confrontational, with a face that closely resembled the composite sketch of the suspect, including a similar beard. Initially, the police were thrilled, thinking they had found the right man. However, they were wrong. Christopher had an alibi for the day of Ardath's disappearance. His landlord stated that on August 6, 2003, Christopher was at home in the morning, then he heading to his job at a restaurant. This revelation puzzled the police, as they wondered how the landlord could recall the details of that day so clearly a year later. Another discrepancy emerged. Christopher did not have an eagle tattoo on his shoulder, despite witnesses claiming to have seen one. The detectives considered the possibility that he had removed the tattoo and remained convinced that Christopher was the suspect they were looking for. They were determined to prove it. A few weeks after Ardath's incident, a similar attack took place in the evening. A girl who bore a striking resemblance to Ardath was walking alone across a bridge when she noticed someone following her. Upon turning around, she saw an attractive man approaching on a bicycle. The girl made it clear she wasn't interested in talking and asked to be left alone. The man initially rode past her, but then turned his bicycle around and charged at her. With no one nearby to assist, the attacker jumped off his bike and forcibly dragged the girl into the bushes. Her loud screams seemed to frighten the assailant, causing him to flee. The victim reported the incident to the police, but it was handled by different investigators who treated it as an attempted robbery. The detectives working on Ardath's case didn't learn about this incident until much later. In May, another similar attack occurred, targeting a blonde woman. The woman was walking home late one evening after attending a party when a stranger approached her, trying to initiate a conversation. After she asked to be left alone, the stranger claimed to be lost and asked for directions. The woman provided him with the necessary information, and he seemingly left. However, just 10 minutes later, he launched a surprise attack on her from the bushes. The assailant violently attacked the girl, strangling her and twisting her neck. Believing her life was in danger, she fiercely resisted by screaming, hitting, and biting him. Her cries for help caught the attention of nearby residents, who rushed out to investigate. The commotion frightened the attacker, causing him to flee in haste, but he not before making a critical mistake, dropping his phone. Upon investigation, it was discovered that the phone belonged to Christopher Myers. This discovery confirmed the connection between Christopher Myers and a number of cases that shared a similar motif, all targeted blonde girls of similar appearance. When brought in for questioning, Christopher denied any involvement in the murder or other attacks, claiming he had never been to Green Creek or met Ardath. He attributed his behavior to mental health issues and uncontrollable aggression, but insisted he had never physically harmed anyone. Detectives observed that Christopher had crooked teeth and asked him to undergo a polygraph test. The 5-hour test revealed that Christopher was not telling the truth, but he insisted he was innocent, claiming the polygraph results were incorrect. As polygraph results are not admissible as evidence, Christopher to be released. Over the next 5 months, detectives gathered more evidence by interviewing Christopher's acquaintances, including family members, friends, co-workers, and his ex-girlfriend. The investigation found that Christopher had a tough childhood due to growing up in a home plagued by alcoholism. As a result, he developed attention deficit disorder and schizophrenia. Christopher was removed from his biological family and adopted by another couple who showed him love and care. However, his behavioral problems were too difficult to control, and when he was 12 years old, his adoptive parents took him back to the orphanage. As he aged, Christopher appeared to lead a typical life. He graduated from school, attended university, made friends, and lived in a dorm. However, Christopher's roommate thought him strange due to the disturbing stories he shared, which eventually led to him dorm kicked out. An ex-girlfriend revealed that Christopher enjoyed cycling in Ottawa's scenic trails and had a fascination with tattoos, notably one of an eagle on his left shoulder. A sketch of the tattoo was shown to the ex-girlfriend. She confirmed its resemblance to the one Christopher had. On October 13, 2005, Christopher was called in for questioning. The interrogation took place in a small room, with burly men who positioned their chairs close to Christopher, exerting significant psychological pressure. The investigators began with a straightforward assertion: "We know you are responsible for Ardith's death." Christopher gave a vague response initially. 3 hours later, he began testifying, but his account was confusing and inconsistent. He admitted to being in Green Creek on the day of the incident, where he met Ardith. He was drawn to her beauty and tried to get to know her. He started by complimenting her and chatting, then invited her into the woods, and she agreed. In the woods, Christopher claimed he hugged and kissed her, but she pulled away, Ardith apparently not enjoying his advances. Ardith tried to run but fell into the creek. Christopher claimed he tried to save her but was unsuccessful. His actions after the incident, however, raised suspicions. He pulled her body from the water, undressed her, and buried her. When faced with a murder charge, Christopher immediately retracted his statement, claiming he had never met Ardith and his testimony was based on information gathered from the press. Christopher eventually confessed to the murder, providing a map of the trails in Green Creek where he encountered Ardith. He also identified another individual, likely 16 years old Laura, who witnessed him with Ardith in the forest. Laura confirmed that Christopher was the man she saw at the time. On October 20, 2005, Christopher was arrested. Initially, he agreed to recreate the incidents at the crime scene but later claimed it was not the correct location. Despite the evidence matching, Christopher's unstable mental state led to inconsistent testimony, and he confessed to additional attacks on girls, resulting in further charges. During the trial, Christopher's lawyer portrayed him as a troubled young man. Initially, Christopher denied his previous confessions but later decided to plead guilty on January 8, 2008, following his defense attorney's advice. 5 years after the murder, Christopher admitted to the crime but refused to provide motives or details. He also confessed to the other attacks. The prosecution argued that Christopher's presence on the forest trail that day was not coincidental. Instead, he was deliberately stalking potential victims, much like a hunter. He had already assaulted several girls who managed to escape. It is thought that Christopher's intention was to sexually assault someone. Ardith happened to match his desired victim type, being a blonde woman he found attractive. Christopher tried to start a conversation with Ardith, but things got worse, and an argument broke out between them. Laura happened to be riding by, overheard their altercation. The killer tricked Ardith into going into the woods, where he attacked and tried to rape her. To escape, Ardith ran and jumped into the creek. However, Christopher caught up to her and drowned her, then buried her body. Ardith's parents supported the prosecution's account, stating that their daughter was a strong swimmer and couldn't have accidentally drowned in the creek. They believed Christopher had intentionally killed Ardith, but they couldn't understand why Ardith had followed him into the wood. As part of a plea deal, Christopher admitted to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. In 2020, his parole application was rejected, because authorities believed there was a significant likelihood he would reoffend against women. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Ariel Castro. Ariel Castro was born in 1960 on July 10th in the city of Yauco in Puerto Rico. Ariel was the third child in a poor family of 4 children, including parents Liliana Rodriguez and Pedro Castro, and sisters O'Neill, Pedro, and older sister Bonita. Ariel's family barely made ends meet and his parents were constantly arguing. Before Ariel went to school, his parents divorced. His mother Liliana took care of all the children. Now Liliana had almost nothing left to feed her children. In desperation, Liliana and her children decided to move to the United States and settled for a while in southeastern Pennsylvania. In the city of Reading, however, they soon moved to the neighboring state of Ohio and eventually settled in the city of Cleveland. Soon after, Ariel's father Pedro Castro also moved to Cleveland with his new wife and their children. Pedro Castro lived near Liliana and her children. Liliana later married, and Ariel soon had 4 more siblings. Ariel attended Lincoln West High School in Cleveland, graduating in 1978. In addition, Ariel also studied music and attended church regularly with her mother and siblings in a traditional Catholic family. As a teenager, Ariel met a young girl named Grimilda Figueroa, who lived next door to Castro. The two became friends while attending school, and Ariel and Grimilda later began dating. After saving money, Ariel and Grimilda decided to move to a house on Seymour Avenue in southwest Cleveland. The 2-story, 1,300 square foot house was built in 1890 and has been remodeled several times. Inside, there are 4 bedrooms, a dining room, a bathroom, and a spacious basement. However, since moving into the new house, Ariel regularly beats Grimilda and humiliates her morally and physically. Grimilda is still naive at this time and thinks that the situation will improve after the wedding and the birth of the child. However, as time goes by, the situation only gets worse. Grimilda tries not to let anyone know about the terrible things that are happening in her life. Grimilda hides her injuries under her clothes and makes up excuses for the injuries that cannot be hidden. In 1993, Ariel beat his wife so brutally that Grimilda suffered broken ribs, nose, and both arms from falling down the stairs after being pushed by Ariel. However, Grimilda steadfastly refused to report the incident to the police. The incident was covered up. Ariel repeatedly beat Grimilda in the mid-1990s. On one occasion, Ariel caused Grimilda a serious head injury that resulted in a blood clot and a tumor that could not be surgically removed. Ariel was arrested but released just a day later. By the late 90s, Grimilda was tired of the constant beatings and living in fear. Grimilda finally decided to file for divorce, took away the appliances, and moved out of the house. Grimilda won custody of all 4 of their children, Arlene, Antonio, Angie, and Amelia. However, Grimilda's nightmare did not end there. Ariel began to pursue Grimilda for money and threatened her to return to him. Realizing that Grimilda could not handle it on her own, Grimilda finally decided to report to the police to get a restraining order against Ariel. In late April 2012, Grimilda suffered complications related to an inoperable tumor caused by a head injury. Grimilda's children were old enough to care for themselves and live their own lives, so they did not need a guardian. However, the children still maintained contact with their father Ariel. Back in the early 2000s, Ariel lived alone in a 2-story house on Seymour Avenue. Ariel worked as a school bus driver and had a passion for playing the guitar. Ariel often performed at city festivals in Latin bands. His neighbors often spoke highly of him, praising his hospitality and kind personality. However, there were many strange things in Ariel's actions that went unnoticed. That he was prosecuted several times for traffic violations while driving a school bus. He had speeding and dangerously making U-turns, for which he was fined and even suspended for a while until he was fired in early 2013 for an act that threatened the lives and health of his young passengers. Additionally, Ariel frequently changed bands because Ariel was kicked out for being late, disrupting rehearsals and concerts. Another strange thing is that after his divorce from Grimilda, he never invited anyone to his house, although Ariel often invited neighbors to barbecues in his backyard. It's hard to say how dangerous this smiling, kindly-faced Ariel was. Michelle Knight was Ariel Castro's first victim. In 2002, on August 23, Ariel decided to kidnap Michelle Knight, then 21 years old. Michelle Knight was born in 1981 and came to Cleveland. Michelle was a frequent runaway and had a history with the police. After becoming a single mother, Michelle faced the risk of losing custody of her 2-year-old child. On the day of the incident, Michelle visited a relative's house and then had to go to court, where the issue of regaining custody of her 2-year-old child had just been decided. While walking down the street, Michelle saw Ariel Castro driving up and offering her a ride. Since Michelle knew the nearby school bus driver, she didn't suspect Ariel and decided to get in his car. On the way, Ariel tells Michelle that he is taking care of puppies at home and invites Michelle to visit them and help Ariel find homes for the puppies. Michelle agrees, but as soon as she enters Ariel's house, he changes completely. Ariel becomes violent and begins hitting Michelle repeatedly. Ariel then chains her up and takes her to the basement. Over the next few days, Ariel starved Michelle and denied her water. Michelle endured constant beatings and abuse. She could not even get up and had to beg Ariel to let her go, promising not to tell anyone about it. When Michelle's mother reported her daughter missing to the police, for years the police did not prioritize the case and allocated limited resources to the investigation. Michelle's family searched for the girl themselves by contacting neighbors, friends, and concerned people. They also asked for help from Ariel, who helped post flyers around the city with Michelle's picture. However, no one knew that Michelle was being held in Ariel's basement. Ariel's second character was Amanda Berry. This girl was kidnapped in the spring of 2003. Amanda was a young girl who lived near Ariel and worked at a local restaurant. She was born on April 22, 1986 and was about to celebrate her 17th birthday. However, on April 21, 2003, Amanda mysteriously disappeared. After her shift, Amanda called home and told her sister that she would be home soon. As Amanda left the restaurant and headed to the bus stop, Ariel drove up to her and offered to give Amanda a ride home. Amanda accepted. Amanda knew Ariel's son because they had been in the same class for many years. So Amanda trusted Ariel and agreed to go with him. However, Ariel lied to her along the way, saying that Ariel needed help. When Amanda entered Ariel's house, Amanda was trapped. Ariel raped her in public, then took Amanda to the basement. There, she met Michelle, who had been kidnapped and held captive for months. Amanda was also attacked, abused, and starved for days until Amanda's body was too weak to resist. A massive search was launched after Amanda went missing. Her disappearance was widely reported in the media and Amanda's parents appeared on popular television shows such as Oprah Winfrey and Montel Williams. They shared their story and urged anyone with information about Amanda's whereabouts to contact them immediately. On one show, famous psychic Sylvia Brown was invited on. After viewing a photo of Amanda, she said that the girl had died and her body was in the water. The words troubled Amanda's parents, but the mother, Louise Miller, continued to search for her daughter until she died in March 2006 of a heart attack. In 2012, a criminal named Robert Wolford suddenly confessed to Amanda's murder and offered to show them where her body was buried. Robert led police to a vacant lot in West Cleveland, claiming that he had buried Amanda there. However, a lengthy search failed to uncover any trace. Robert was later found to have lied for fame and television, leading to his being sentenced to an additional 5 years in prison for perjury and obstructing justice. In April 2004, this time, Ariel chose Gina de Jesus, a 14-year-old girl in his daughter's class. Ariel met Gina and another girlfriend after school. After chatting for a while, the two girls decided to go home separately. When they reached the corner of West 105th Street, Ariel met Gina and offered to take Gina home. Since Gina had known Ariel since childhood, having long been the father of her best friend, Gina got into Ariel's car without suspecting anything. Although it was daytime, there were no witnesses to the kidnapping because the streets were deserted at that time. In addition, Gina took the initiative to get into Ariel's car, so there was no easily detectable conflict. The story of Gina's disappearance was aired on Fox TV's America's Most Wanted and was re-aired twice in 2005 and 2006. Ariel also posed as a volunteer looking for missing girls. When she brought Gina home, Ariel treated Gina similarly to Michelle and Amanda. Abused, sexually assaulted, and locked in the basement. It is believed that the kidnapping was carried out by a middle-aged Hispanic man. Was seen by a passerby. There was even a sketch that looked very similar to Ariel. During the 10 years of their captivity, Ariel constantly abused her victims. They were often starved, attempting to break their spirits and destroy their self-esteem. Severe punishments were also carried out if the three girls did not comply. Michelle, the oldest captive, suffered the most. Ariel would not spare her and would often beat Michelle to intimidate the other girls, forcing them to obey without asking any questions. After years of captivity in the dark and damp basement, Ariel moved them to a room on the second floor, which overlooked the courtyard. During her captivity, Michelle became pregnant at least 5 times. However, each time she showed signs of pregnancy, Ariel brutally attempted to terminate the pregnancy, starving Michelle and kicking her in the stomach until Michelle miscarried. After one brutal torture, Michelle almost died from severe blood loss. Despite this, Ariel remained completely indifferent and refused to let her call a rescue vehicle. The girls were not allowed to bathe more than once a week. To use the toilet, they had only a bucket of water, which Ariel rarely emptied. Ariel only fed the girls once a day but constantly beat and abused them. One day, Ariel gives the girls a puppy, but a week later, Ariel brutally kills the dog in front of them as punishment for Michelle's disobedience. Gina, in 2006, Amanda realizes she is pregnant and is horrified by the image of Ariel beating her to induce a miscarriage. Ariel this time let Amanda get pregnant and give birth. In preparation for the birth, he bought a special inflatable float. In December 2006, Amanda gave birth to a daughter named Jocelyn. Although the baby was born weak, she was lucky to survive. As Jocelyn grew older, the girls began to care for her and create a close environment for her. This helped them temporarily forget the difficult situation they were in. Ariel also changed significantly after having his daughters. Ariel began giving the 3 girls he kidnapped small gifts and sometimes letting them out into the yard with Jocelyn, but always under close supervision. Jocelyn was developing well, speaking clearly, and being taught to read, write, and count by her mother. Outwardly, she appeared healthy, well cared for and well fed. Despite being imprisoned for years under Ariel's relentless control, the victims attempted to escape many times, but each time they were brutally punished, but the girls never gave up hope. However, on May 6, 2013, Ariel left the house and forgot to lock one of the interior doors. This gave Amanda an opportunity. She left the room and went to the window that looked out onto the street. When Amanda saw a neighbor walking past the house, Amanda began banging and screaming at the window. A man heard a strange noise and stopped, thinking someone needed help. Another neighbor also heard the screams and decided to call emergency services. While waiting for the police to arrive, The men broke the lock on the front door and helped Amanda and her young daughter escape. When the police arrived, Amanda told them that her name was Amanda Berry and that she had been kidnapped 10 years ago. Amanda also said that 2 other kidnapped girls were being held in a house, in other apartments. All 3 were rescued and taken to hospital the same day. Amanda, her younger daughter Jocelyn, and Gina were not in critical condition, but Michelle had suffered severe physical and mental damage from the constant abuse. Michelle lost hearing in one ear and almost lost sight in her left eye. Many of Michelle's bones were bent and would not heal, requiring plastic surgery to restore the shape of her disfigured face. After the trauma and forced abortion, Michelle was unable to have children. When police received a report of 3 missing girls and a baby found in Ariel's home, Ariel Castro was arrested in a McDonald's parking lot just an hour later. Ariel's brothers, O'Neill and Pedro, were also arrested on suspicion of involvement, as they had been frequent visitors to Ariel's home. However, they were quickly released due to lack of evidence linking them to the case, as the victims had confirmed. Ariel was charged with forcible kidnapping, assault, battery, forcible confinement, cruelty, and taking the life of an unborn child. Ariel could have received a common law conviction. However, the prosecution required a death sentence. Ariel agreed to cooperate with the investigation and pleaded guilty. Ariel would recount all the events that took place in his home. In return, he would not be sentenced to death but instead to life in prison. Surprisingly, Ariel recalls in great detail the days of kidnapping the girls and bringing them into his home. Ariel recounted all the torture and abuse he had inflicted on his victims, but blamed the girls for unwittingly agreeing to get into Ariel's car and condemned himself to such a fate. On August 1, 2013, Ariel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On July 9, 2013, Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina De Jesus began a new life after being released from the Insanity's custody. After his conviction, Ariel was transferred to a rehabilitation center in Orient, Ohio, where he was closely monitored. However, on September 3, 2013, Ariel was found dead in his cell. At the time, Ariel was 53 years old. Ariel Castro's family members have apologized to the victims and their families. Michelle Knight wrote a book titled Life After Darkness: Finding Healing and Happiness After the Cleveland Kidnapping in 2018. Gina De Jesus also published a memoir titled Hope, a memoir of survival in Cleveland. There are also multiple documentary projects and 2 feature films about the terrifying kidnapping mission. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Kristen Smart. Kristen Denise Smart was born on February 20, 1977, in Augsburg, Bavaria, West Germany. She was raised by her parents, Stan and Denise Smart. When she was young, the family moved to Stockton, California. She is the oldest of 3 children. Kristen's mother, Denise, often called her a dreamer. Kristen loved the ocean and had an adventurous spirit. She was truly passionate about experiencing life. Kristen graduated from Lincoln High School in Stockton in 1995. Before college, she worked as a lifeguard and a summer camp counselor at Camp Mokulea in Hawaii. In 1996, Kristen enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, California. She was ambitious but indecisive. Kristen initially enrolled at Cal Poly to study architecture because she loved to draw, but later changed her major to communication studies. Denise said that Kristen wanted to travel the world as a reporter. On Memorial Day weekend in 1996, Kristen called home and left a voicemail, "Good news, good news. I'll call home Sunday." Kristen was in regular contact with her family every Sunday. That day, Kristen had attended an off-campus birthday party that Friday night. Her friend, Margarita Campos, recalled taking her there. Margarita said Kristen seemed a little upset that Margarita couldn't join her that night. Margarita's last words to Kristen were to be careful. Kristen was wearing a gray cropped t-shirt, black shorts, and red Puma sneakers. As the party was winding down, at 2 a.m., classmate Tim Davis found Kristen unconscious on the grass nearby. He and another classmate and acquaintance of Kristen's, Cheryl Anderson, helped her walk back to the school dormitory. Paul Flores then approached Kristen and offered to help her get back to her dorm, saying he was leaving the party. Paul, Kristen, and Cheryl returned to campus, and since Davis lived off campus, he could not accompany them. Once the three of them were alone, Cheryl began to notice Paul's strange behavior. She noticed the many unexpected stops along the way and the way he interacted with Kristen. While walking, Paul would frequently hold Kristen around the waist, and Kristen would also wrap her arms around his neck. This made Cheryl even more curious, especially when Paul suggested that Cheryl walk ahead while he and Kristen tried to catch up. Cheryl eventually went her own way, but not before reminding Paul to make sure Kristen returned safely. Paul claimed that he had dropped Kristen off at the intersection of the hallways leading to both of their dorms. It was around 2:30 a.m. on May 25, 1996. Kristen Smart was never seen again. When Sunday passed without a call from Kristen, Kristen's roommates and neighbors thought something was wrong. They contacted the university police department to report Kristen missing, but no report was filed. Concerned, they called Kristen's family and the San Luis Obispo Police Department. 5 days after Kristen went missing, Paul was interviewed by UPD investigators. Paul said that the two had gone their separate ways at the intersection. However, investigators quickly noticed Paul's black eye. When asked about it, Paul explained that he had injured it during a basketball game. But a friend later disputed this story, stating that Paul's black eye had appeared before the basketball game. Paul told the friend that he didn't know how he got the black eye, he just woke up with it. A month later, Paul was interviewed again and confessed that he had lied about the black eye incident. This time, Paul said that he had hit his eye on the steering wheel of a truck. However, when questioned further, Paul admitted that this story didn't make sense either. He said he was in the truck at about 2 a.m. on May 27, 1996, and was installing a car radio because he was selling the truck. A search for Kristen began. Search dogs were used on June 29, 1996. For dogs trained to search for human remains were used individually to search for clues at the dormitory. Santa Lucia Hall. Each dog was sent to room 128, Paul Flores' room. The dogs showed no interest in the room, except for the corner of a mattress. Dog handler Carta Adela Morris said the dogs can detect the slightest physiological changes. During the search, their reactions suggested a high probability that there was a body in room 128. Another handler also recalled her dog's behavior while searching room 128. The dog searched the left side of the room several times, and Tori's behavior and strong reactions suggested that she had picked up the scent of something, but was still searching for its source. Although Paul Flores remained the prime suspect, no formal charges were ever filed. During that time, Paul Flores continued to live his life freely, although he was suspected by the police. From 1996 to 2007, the investigation continued, and searches were conducted at every possible location, including 4 properties owned by the Flores family. However, none of these searches yielded positive results. On the advice of his attorney, Paul Flores decided not to answer any questions by exercising his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. A person who invokes this provision has the right to remain silent and is not required to provide information that could incriminate them. During his 1997 deposition, Paul exercised this right and remained silent. This made it difficult for investigators, especially attorney James R. Murphy, as they were unable to find any new leads. Despite the overwhelming evidence linking Paul to the case, former Sheriff Ed Williams also admitted that he did not see a way to close the case. Paul's silence frustrated the authorities. The Smart family filed a wrongful death lawsuit for Kristen. However, the court decided not to proceed with charges. Kristen's case remains under criminal investigation. Paul and his family have refused to publicly address Kristen's case or the allegations against them. A roommate of Paul's, Derek C., said Paul joked about Kristen's disappearance. However, these allegations remain speculative as Paul has hired a lawyer to defend himself from further questioning. 6 years after her disappearance, Denise Smart said it was a difficult time. A longtime case follower, Chris Lambert, who was 8 at the time, was haunted by Kristen's disappearance. As he grew older, he wondered why the case of Kristen were still no answers. In 2018, Chris quit his job to create a podcast about the case full-time. With no formal training in law or journalism, he was driven only by his passion for finding answers. In 2019, Chris visited Kristen's memorial on her birthday and decided to wait to meet someone willing to talk about Kristen. Chris met Kristen's mother and began talking to her about her daughter. From there, Chris and the Smart family built a strong relationship and worked to bring Kristen's story to the public through the podcast, In Your Own Backyard. The podcast began as a local series but quickly went national and garnered over 11 million downloads. The core of the podcast follows the case of Kristen Smart and her disappearance from campus. Chris has a unique ability to get people to feel comfortable sharing information with him. He has interviewed many people who have been involved in the case to varying degrees. Chris is especially interested in witnesses who are reluctant to speak or have been ignored by investigators. He has uncovered many allegations that have been speculation for years. An interview with an Australian exchange student brought to light a possible fight between Kristen and Paul. According to Chris, the student allegedly saw Kristen fighting with Paul on the night of her disappearance. During the investigation into Kristen Smart's disappearance, several theories emerged. The first theory was that Paul Flores was injured in a fight with Kristen. The second theory was that Paul's father, Ruben Flores, helped cover up the crime. The third theory was that Kristen's body was buried in the Flores backyard. The investigation also revealed allegations of serious misconduct by Paul toward multiple women. Women who had attended school or worked with Paul reported his excessive flirting and excessive drinking. Several women accused Paul of sexual or physical assault, including harassment and controlling behavior. Chris attempted to contact Paul for an interview, but was unsuccessful. An interview could have cleared up some of the loose ends and given Paul a chance to address the allegations against him. However, Chris has not contacted Kristen's family. San Luis Obispo Police Chief Ann Parkinson praised Chris for his work in helping to advance the investigation into Kristen Smart's disappearance. Chris created a compelling, well-done podcast that drew people to the case. Parkinson noted that going public with the story convinced several people involved to come forward, which had a significant impact on the investigation. Denise Smart also thanked Chris for his hard work, saying that the podcast had created an opportunity for people to come together to seek the truth. She also thanked Sheriff Parkinson for helping to keep the case fresh since he took office in 2011. Although the Flores family has remained silent, the investigation and podcast have shaken their confidence. On January 29, 2020, 2 trucks owned by Paul Flores were presented as evidence. Then, on February 5 of that year, authorities executed search warrants at 4 different locations, including a home in Los Angeles. During the search, Paul Flores was briefly detained. On April 22, 2020, the Los Angeles Times reported that a search warrant was executed at Paul Flores' home in San Pedro, California. The search resulted in the recovery of several items of evidence, including date rape drugs and videos showing Paul Flores sexually assaulting young women. Paul Flores was subsequently arrested on February 11, 2021, in Palos Verdes, Rancho, California, on suspicion of being a felon in possession of a firearm. In March of that year, a search warrant was issued at the home of Paul's father, Ruben Flores, and police used dogs and ground-penetrating radar to search the property, and an older Volkswagen was towed away for evidence after the dogs conducted the search. On April 13, Paul and his father, Ruben, were arrested by the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Department in connection with Kristen's case. Paul and Ruben were charged in the case involving Kristen. Paul was charged with murder, and Ruben was charged with accessory after the fact. Due to the statute of limitations, Paul was able to escape the sexual assault charge but still faced a first-degree murder charge for allegedly killing during attempted rape. In September 2021, a judge declared the case sufficient to go to trial in April 2022. However, the trial was postponed and moved to Monterey County. On July 18, 2022, Paul and Ruben's trials began simultaneously but with two separate jury groups. In his opening statement, Deputy Prosecutor Chris Pavril described Kristen as a young person who had been cruelly treated and taken too soon. He said Kristen's family was suffering from the unknown whereabouts of their daughter and blamed Paul Flores for this. The deputy prosecutor also presented evidence found at Ruben's home that showed both Paul and Ruben were responsible for Kristen's death and the disposal of her body. However, Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, questioned the veracity of this evidence. He said it was a tragic situation that Kristen's body was never found and there was no DNA evidence. He stated that people believed she was dead, but there was no concrete evidence of what happened to her after Paul left her at the dorm. Since July, Paul Flores' trial has attracted public attention as multiple allegations of harassment and violence have been made. Several women have come forward to accuse Paul Flores of inappropriate behavior, including two women who call themselves Rondado and Saradu. Both women alleged that they met Paul Flores and then felt unusually lethargic, leading to memory loss. When they woke up, they said Paul Flores had abused them. Their detailed and emotional testimony brought jurors to tears, forcing Judge Jennifer O'Keefe to call a recess. In addition, testimony regarding the search of Ruben Flores' home also moved another juror to tears. Investigators and experts also attended the trial, providing more details about the case. Judge O'Keefe said the trial would be long and difficult, and jurors would likely be emotional at times. One of the key pieces of evidence presented at the trial was Jennifer Hudson's testimony. She said she met Paul Flores when she was 17, and that he told her that he had buried Kristen Smart under the slope in his backyard in Hawasna. This was one of the most important pieces of evidence presented at the trial. Paul's defense attorney questioned Jennifer's testimony and highlighted her recreational use of drugs and alcohol, calling into question her credibility. The attorney suggested that she was being dishonest in her answers to the question. In fact, Jennifer admitted in a social media post that she did not report the incident to police until after a podcast aired. She also canceled an interview with a detective after meeting with the podcast producer in 2019. The attorney went on to ask Jennifer if she thought Kristen Smart was buried in Susan Flores' backyard. She suggested that this was the most plausible explanation. When the attorney pursued the subject of Jennifer's association with biker gang members, the prosecutor objected to the question and the judge sided with them. During cross-examination, Pavril asked Jennifer to explain her previous testimony and that Jennifer felt responsible for the Smart family's suffering. She explained that if she had not been afraid, she would have spoken up sooner. Jennifer then broke down in tears. No reason was given, and the trial was adjourned after Jennifer's testimony. The trial of Kristen Smart is scheduled to continue until October 2022. For the Smart family, the emotional, decades-long search for the truth is finally coming to an end. However, the grief over the loss of their daughter will never end. On October 18, 2022, separate juries hearing the case simultaneously in Monterey County Circuit Court found Paul Flores guilty of first-degree murder and his father, Ruben Flores, not guilty of being an accessory after the fact. Ruben Flores faces a maximum sentence of 3 years in prison. Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison on March 10, 2023. Paul Flores is currently serving his sentence at Pleasant Valley State Prison. On August 23, 2023, Flores was attacked by fellow inmate Jason Boudreau, who was serving a life sentence for killing his girlfriend. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jane Hilton. Jane was a familiar face in El Dorado Hills, California. She wrote for the Foothill Times and often reported on local social events. Jane had 6 children, whom she loved dearly and often inspired through her daily poetry. After earning her real estate license, she married Archie Hilton in 1984, but the marriage fell apart in July 1985. Seeking help, Jane approached her former boss, Will McLean, who owned a large house in El Dorado Hills. Will's daughter, Maureen Klein, lived there with her boyfriend. Will's nephew, Ricky Davis, and his girlfriend, Connie Dahl, were also staying in another room in the house. On July 6, 1985, Will invited Jane and his youngest daughter, Autumn Anchor, to live in his house. Will's house was crowded and had a lot of people coming and going. However, Jane and Autumn's first night there would be their last. At 3:30 a.m., Ricky Davis, 20, and his girlfriend Connie Dahl, 19, returned from a party and found Autumn wandering around outside. Autumn said she had been attacked and feared her mother would be angry. The 3 of them then went inside, where they found traces of blood in the hallway. When they entered the first room, which belonged to Ricky's mother, Maureen, the air became quiet. On the bed, they found the bloody body of Jane Hilton. She had stopped breathing. Because Maureen and her boyfriend were away on a camping trip and were not home at the time, Ricky and Connie called 911. Paramedics and police arrived at the scene, but Jane was pronounced dead at the scene. She had been stabbed 29 times, beaten, and bitten on the shoulder. This senseless murder led investigators to begin questioning those closest to Jane. Archie Hilton, Jane's estranged husband, was at the top of the list of suspects. He was interviewed and provided a solid alibi, including DNA. Initially, Archie Hilton was the logical choice because their marriage was in trouble. However, he said that although they were having some difficulties, there was no sign that he and Jane were going to divorce. When Ricky Davis and Connie Dahl were interviewed, they both said that they came home early in the morning and found Autumn waiting outside. When they entered the house, they found the hallway carpet soaked in blood. The blood trail led them to the master bedroom, where they found Jane lying dead on the bloody mattress. The details and physical evidence in the case were scant, and the potential suspects all had alibis. The case gradually went cold. The cold case was reopened in 1999, and El Dorado County Sheriff's Department detectives Richard Strasser and Rick Fitzgerald were assigned to investigate. After a thorough review of the case file, they focused on a newspaper article about Connie Dahl, Ricky Davis's ex-girlfriend and Jane Hilton's roommate. In the article, Connie described the position of Jane's body when she was found, lying on the bed, as if someone had placed her in her usual sleeping position. However, this testimony contradicted Ricky Davis's earlier statement. Ricky had said on the recording that the body was found on the floor. But at the time, detectives thought they heard Ricky say that, but they weren't sure. Detectives questioned Connie for 3 hours. At first, she stuck to her story. But over the next 18 months, Connie was questioned 4 times. Each time, the detectives used techniques known to increase the likelihood of a false confession. They accused Connie of her role in the murder, and she was threatened with being charged with murder. As a result, Connie cooperated with the detectives, even though she had no actual role in the case. She was convicted of manslaughter and only served 1 year in prison. Detective Strasser and Fitzgerald lied to Connie, telling her that they would use DNA evidence to identify a suspect. In fact, no DNA evidence was collected or tested in this case. Instead, the investigators used crime scene photos and real events, such as the bite mark on Jane's shoulder, to provide information to Connie and guide her to recall events the way they wanted. Over the course of 4 interviews, Connie began to lose control and recall events from the case. However, this also allowed her to create a completely different story about the night of the murder, based on what she remembered and what investigators gave her. Connie Dahl gave conflicting accounts of Jane Hilton's murder. In one interview, she claimed that Autumn Anker was present at the crime scene and was shot. In another interview, she admitted that she may have bitten Jane's shoulder. Connie also claimed that the murder began with an argument between Ricky Davis and Jane, which stemmed from Ricky's desire for Autumn to join them at a party, which Jane refused. Despite changing her story to fit the facts, Connie could not recall the murder weapon or where it was hidden. However, she implicated her ex-boyfriend Ricky Davis in the case, making him the prime suspect. Following Connie's confession, detectives interviewed Ricky Davis and Autumn Anker. Both stuck to their original accounts of the case. The detectives attempted to deceive Ricky by telling him that Autumn had also implicated him in the murder, but he did not change his story. Autumn told the detectives that she had no reason to protect Ricky and would not be swayed by threats of charges. Despite using coercive interrogation techniques, the detectives were unable to get Ricky or Autumn to change their statements. Therefore, they used Connie's confession to arrest Ricky. Connie accepted a plea bargain, agreeing to testify against Ricky in exchange for a reduced sentence. At Ricky's first trial, the jury was unable to reach a verdict, leading to a retrial. However, at his second trial in 2005, the jury found him guilty. During the trial, Connie took the stand and testified against Ricky. She explained that she had wrestled with Jane and accidentally bit her shoulder. Connie then walked out, leaving Ricky alone with Jane. Once outside, she heard Jane screaming, pleading, and gagging as Ricky continued to assault her. Ricky was sentenced to 16 years in prison for second-degree murder, largely based on Connie's testimony. Connie, on the other hand, received a reduced sentence of manslaughter and a 1-year sentence in county jail. Unfortunately, she died of a drug overdose in 2014. Despite his conviction, Ricky maintained his innocence. In 2006, he contacted the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, for help in proving his innocence. NCIP, a nonprofit founded in 2001 by Kathleen Rodolphi and Linda Starr, provides DNA testing services to convicted prisoners who claim innocence. Ricky's case was reopened in 2006 after he contacted NCIP. NCIP and the El Dorado County District Attorney's Office worked together to retest DNA from the crime scene. The retesting included Hilton's nightgown and biological material found under her fingernails. The retesting uncovered a DNA profile from an unidentified male. This DNA was found on both Hilton's fingernails and nightgown, indicating that they came from the same source. The results cleared Ricky, Connie, and Anker of any crimes. This also proved that Connie's testimony was false. The DNA test results also proved Archie Hilton innocent, but unfortunately, he had passed away by the time the results were released. The unidentified DNA profile was entered into the FBI's CODIS database, but no matches were found. While the new evidence supports Ricky's claim of innocence, there are still obstacles to overcome. NCIP successfully argued that if the DNA test results had been presented at Ricky's trial, the outcome might have been different. In California, the standard for overturning a conviction typically requires new evidence that clearly establishes innocence. This standard is extremely difficult to meet. An expert on false confessions, Richard Leo, reviewed the transcript of Connie Dahl's interview in 2015. He found that detectives used pressure techniques to force Connie to give a false confession that fit the detectives' preconceived ideas about Jane Hilton's murder. Then, in 2016, the Northern California Innocence Project, NCIP, helped sponsor Senate Bill 1134, which was intended to address these issues. The bill allows wrongfully convicted people like Ricky to prove that new evidence could convince a jury. It was passed in January 2017, after NCIP attorney Melissa O'Connell filed a motion for a new trial based on new DNA evidence. The bill was sponsored by former California State Senator Mark Leno and brings California standards in line with those of 43 other states. In 2019, Superior Court Judge Kenneth Malakian overturned Ricky's 2005 conviction and ordered a new trial. It was originally scheduled to begin in the fall of 2019, but due to the health of his defense attorney, the judge announced the trial would take place in April 2020. However, the trial date changed again. Advances in DNA testing helped Ricky become the first person in California and only the second person in the United States to be exonerated of a crime. A new DNA testing method called genetic genealogy helped achieve this result. Genetic genealogy is a new DNA testing method that involves taking DNA evidence from the crime scene and sending it to genetic companies. These companies then search genealogical databases to find a potential match. In February 2020, the DNA evidence matched a man. In February 2020, El Dorado County District Attorney Vern Pearson announced that a new suspect had been identified in the death of Jane Hilton. The man was identified through DNA evidence collected from the crime scene. Following his arrest, several residents who knew the man revealed his identity to the media. The man is known as Michael Green, a longtime resident of Roseville, California. Michael graduated from Oakmont High School in 1986. According to those who knew him, Michael was a nice and easygoing person. They even described him as very calm and cool. So, a former friend of Michael could not understand why he would commit such a brutal act in El Dorado Hills. Michael was 17 years old at the time of the crime. On the night of July 6, 1985, Jane Hilton's daughter Autumn met Michael and his two friends, Calvin and Stephen, at a park. Autumn then decided to go home to shower and said she would come back to see her friends. However, she went to another friend's house instead of going back to the park. However, that evening, Autumn returned to the park to meet the boys again. What happened next is only speculation. Investigators believe Michael took advantage of the moment to break into Jane's home and was discovered by her. In the struggle to escape, Michael may have attacked Jane in a frenzy. After the attack, Jane's body was discovered by Ricky, Connie, and Autumn when they returned home. Michael had no criminal record before or after the murder. Michael appeared to have lived a normal life until DNA linked him to the gruesome crime. Two other boys who were with Michael were sought shortly after his arrest. One boy, Calvin, had died some time ago. However, another boy, Stephen, was found and questioned the day after the arrest. Stephen is considered a witness, not a participant in the case. Michael was arrested on February 11, 2020. As Michael was a juvenile at the time of the murder, he made his first appearance in juvenile court on February 19, 2020. Michael was then transferred so that he could be tried as an adult. Michael waited 2.5 years before he was tried in court. On July 29, 2022, Michael pleaded no contest. This means that Michael waived his right to a jury trial, and he will face a charge of first-degree murder. He also waived his opportunity to object to the plea. His sentencing date was set for September 27, 2022, with Judge Suzanne Kingsbury presiding. During the sentencing hearing, Dr. Elizabeth Kaufman, a professor of educational psychology, was called to testify about adolescent development. Kaufman's research shows that adolescents have a variety of developmental needs, including emotional and cognitive development. In late adolescence, young people can distinguish between right and wrong, but their ability to control their emotions declines. To provide additional information, the defense called several witnesses from Michael's childhood who had maintained relationships with him into adulthood. When asked about their views of Michael after learning of his confession, all agreed that they were shocked he had committed the murder of Jane Hilton. Those who knew Michael described him as cheerful, well-liked, funny, and lovable, both before and after the murder. Michael's ex-wife, Karen Green, said, "Mike was not evil at all." After the witnesses finished testifying, each of Jane Hilton's children gave victim impact statements. All described the unforgivable loss Michael had caused their family. Heather Purvis McConnell, Jane Hilton's daughter, said, "The pain that will never go away will always haunt me." Ardith Brandon, Hilton's fourth child, said, "I loved my mother and I think Michael loved her too. I want to know how he would feel or what he would say to the person who stabbed your mother 29 times. What would you do if you got a call in the early morning to tell you your mother was dead?" Ardith recounted collecting her mother's belongings from the house where she was killed and ended with a powerful statement, "We will always have something in common, regret for the stupid decision you made 37 years ago." Hilton's son, Ian, echoed his sister's sentiments. He went on to explain the hardships the family faced and the constant nightmares they endured, especially after being wrongly blamed for her sister Autumn. As he finished, he broke down in tears and said, "All the words we say will never bring my mother back." Autumn was the last to speak. Her testimony showed real pain as she recounted what she had been through over the past 2 decades. She recounted the day 2 detectives came to her home, telling her they had found the people responsible for her mother's death. She was later accused of biting her mother and helping move her body from the floor to the bed. Autumn said that if she had not sought the help of a lawyer at the time, she doesn't know how far the investigators' intimidation tactics could have gone. Deputy District Attorney Jay Linden read a statement on behalf of the family. In the statement, he questioned Michael about why he killed Jane in such a brutal manner. "You hit her. She had multiple injuries around her head and face. You kicked her in the jaw. You bit her shoulder. Why did you do that?" Linden went on to read a statement expressing that Michael did not just kill Jane, he destroyed many lives in the process. Linden then asked Michael if he thought about Jane and who she was. He pointed out her accomplishments and the love she had for each of her children. In her closing argument, Michael's defense attorney, Margaret Husher, emphasized that Michael was not in control of his actions. Margaret argued that Michael did not realize that his actions were wrong because he was a teenager at the time. This argument was based on expert testimony from Dr. Kaufman. She asked the court to consider a reduced sentence, reading various criminal codes and court rules. However, Judge Kingsbury interjected and stated that the court would not consider granting Michael probation, leaving the defense unable to add any further comment. In response, Linden thanked the court and said that the request for probation was an insult. He said it was like a slap in the face to the victim's family, who had suffered for decades. Linden stated that Michael had gotten away with murder for 37 years and that granting him probation would allow him to get away with more. Judge Kingsbury has heard many arguments about juvenile murder cases. In her 26 years as a judge, she said the murder of Jane Hilton was the most brutal. Before sentencing, Kingsbury asked the victim's family to forgive them for the pain they have endured. She also hoped they would overcome their pain, as that was their mother's wish. Kingsbury encouraged Michael Green to use all the resources available to him in the California Department of Rehabilitation. She said Michael could achieve parole if he used those resources. Kingsbury also said Michael had a great side and that he had a lot to offer. She also said he was young enough to be released and live a productive life. Michael Green was sentenced to life in prison and is being held in the El Dorado County Jail. He will then be transferred to the California Department of Rehabilitation. Restitution will be determined after further review by the court. Ricky Davis, who was wrongfully convicted of the murder, was released on February 13, 2020. He will be entitled to more than $750,000 in state compensation. However, his attorney argues that this amount does not make up for the years of freedom he has lost. Ricky continues to sue the state for damages covering the period from May 21, 2002 to February 13, 2020, for a whopping $18 million. The lawsuit is still pending as of 2022. In September 2022, California passed Assembly Bill 2644, which prohibits law enforcement officers from using threats, physical harm, deception, or manipulative interrogation tactics when interrogating people 17 years of age or younger. District Attorney Vern Pearson is calling on all law enforcement agencies to stop using intimidation tactics. He says the deceptive tactics that have been used for years will assume guilt and focus on getting a confession instead of getting the whole story. The El Dorado County DA's office will now dismiss any case where the main evidence is a confession obtained through threats, lies, or psychologically manipulative interrogation tactics. The measures are intended to ensure that no one is convicted based on a false, coerced confession like the one that Ricky Davis made. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Velma Barfield. Velma Barfield was born in 1932 in Eastover, North Carolina, and grew up in the shadow of the Great Depression. In a poor family of 9 children, Velma's family worked hard on tobacco farms, but life was still difficult. Velma's father, Murphy Bullard, was an outspoken man. Murphy often flew into fits of rage, and Velma claimed that her father physically and mentally abused her and her sisters. Velma's mother, Lily Bullard, suffered from her husband's fiery temper. In their world, love and care were considered luxuries. As a result, Velma and her brothers had a difficult childhood, lacking affection and constantly facing the threat of violence. As a child, Velma noticed a glaring disparity in her finances between herself and her friends. This sparked her first acts of crime. At first, Velma took small amounts of money from her father to buy small items that her classmates liked. However, her stealing gradually became fatter when she stole $80 from an elderly neighbor. When the matter was discovered, her father punished Velma very severely. After that, she gave up stealing. Raised in a Catholic family, Velma found comfort and faith in the Bible. However, as she grew up, the psychological trauma from her past shaped her into a woman with special power. During World War II, the world around her changed rapidly. The war caused her family to face many difficulties. Velma was forced to take responsibility for her life and family early. Her dreams and desires were often hidden behind her primary goal of survival. As Velma grew older, her desire for a better life grew, and she longed to escape her difficult circumstances. At the age of 17, Velma decided to drop out of school. In her search for love and work, she met Thomas Burke, and the two later married, but this marriage brought new difficulties. By the age of 19, Velma had 2 children, a son named Ron and a daughter named Kim. For more than 15 years, the family lived in Parkton, North Carolina. In 1965, Thomas was in a serious car accident and suffered head injuries. To cope with the pain and headaches caused by the injury, Thomas became a heavy drinker and drug addict. This affected his family, especially Velma, who had experienced past trauma due to her father's alcohol abuse. Velma vowed never to let history repeat itself, but she also faced difficulties in her own life. During this time, Velma faced many pressures, including an unhappy marriage, motherhood, and past patterns. Velma tried to find stability by working at a textile factory, but she soon had to quit to deal with health issues. She then had to undergo an emergency hysterectomy. After the surgery, Velma began to suffer from seizures and was prescribed medication. However, the use of seizure medication gradually became a habit, causing her to become mentally impaired. Velma's drinking increased, each step pushing her into a more desperate and out-of-control state. On April 4, 1969, while she and her children were away from home, the house caught fire. Thomas, who was still in the house, died of smoke inhalation. After the fire, Velma and her children moved in with her parents. A few months after her Thomas's death, Velma began a relationship with a divorced man named Jennings Barfield. They married in August 1970. However, their relationship did not last. After an argument, Jennings died of a heart attack on March 21, 1971. Velma returned to her parents' home. Later, Velma's father died of cancer in the summer of 1974. Her mother also suffered from severe stomach pain and was hospitalized. Although she recovered and returned home in August 1974, Velma's mother was hospitalized again due to severe stomach pain. Because her illness was so severe, she died after 2 hours of treatment. Another man Velma was dating was in a car accident and died on December 30th of the same year. Velma's financial difficulties and addiction led to another bad decision. She started forging checks to meet her growing needs. But deception came at a cost, and those around her began to lose faith in Velma. In 1975, Velma was convicted of 7 counts of writing bad checks and sentenced to 6 months in prison. However, she was released after serving 3 months. After her release in 1976, Velma took a job caring for the elderly. She initially worked for 94-year-old Montgomery Edwards and his 84-year-old wife in Lumberton, North Carolina. Montgomery fell ill and died on January 29, 1977. A few weeks later, in February, Montgomery's wife Dolly developed symptoms of the same stomach illness as Velma's mother and died on March 1. Velma then cared for Record Lee, 76, who had lost a leg. On June 4, 1977, Record Lee's husband, John Henry, began experiencing severe pain and cramps in his abdomen. Doctors attributed his condition to a severe stomach virus. However, he died later that month. Velma then moved in with her new boyfriend, Roland Stewart. While attending a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County, Roland Stewart suddenly complained of severe abdominal pain. He was rushed to the hospital but could not be saved, dying a few days later. Roland Stewart's relatives were suspicious of his mysterious death. They reported to the police to find out the reason for Roland Stewart's death. An autopsy was ordered. An investigation into Roland Stewart's death was opened. Before the autopsy results were released, Lumberton police received an anonymous phone call, reportedly from Velma's sister, who said that Velma had poisoned Roland Stewart and others. As a result, Velma was arrested for the murder of Roland Stewart. During the interrogation, Velma confessed to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry, her mother Lillian, and her boyfriend Roland Stewart. Velma confessed that she had forged checks to her boyfriend Roland Stewart's account and that he had found out about it, so Velma had mixed rat poison into his beer and tea, and in previous victims Velma had given weed killers containing paraquat and barbiturates. Velma had secretly put these substances into her victims' food or drinks, leading to their deaths. At trial, Velma's defense attorney argued that she was insane, but this was not accepted. Velma appeared cold and emotionless, laughing at the prosecutor and even applauding after his closing speech. the defense attorney attempted to explain that Velma was not a monster but a soul trapped by addiction, and that the difficult circumstances she had experienced since childhood had caused Velma's actions to be beyond her control. The attorney emphasized Velma's mental health struggles as a mitigating factor in Velma's crimes. December 12, 1978. The jury considered the circumstances and decided to sentence Velma to death for murder and causing harm to the victim's family. The verdict was an acknowledgement of the victim's family's irreplaceable loss. A unit for female death row inmates was later established at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. While on death row, Velma quit smoking and expressed remorse. At night, the faces of her victims haunted her dreams, and Velma silently contemplated the crimes she had committed. Velma's appeal was filed with the North Carolina Supreme Court on October 30, 1984. The appeal claimed that she was incompetent at her original trial due to her struggles with drug addiction. However, the court denied her appeal. The day before her execution, Velma instructed her attorney, Jimmy, to withdraw all remaining appeals. She expressed her desire to die with dignity, as allowed by the state of North Carolina. In her final hours, Velma reflected on her life and prayed, finding solace in her faith as she prepared for death. Pastor Billy Graham offered her words of comfort over the phone, saying, "Velma, in a way I envy you because you're going to get to heaven before I do." Velma was executed on November 2, 1984, at the Central Penitentiary in Raleigh. Before her execution, she expressed remorse for the pain she had caused, stating that she was deeply sorry for the pain she had caused and that many families had suffered greatly. She also expressed her gratitude to those who had supported her over the past 6 years, saying that she appreciated the unwavering support of her family, her attorneys, and the kindness of the prison staff, and that she was grateful for their compassion and understanding during this difficult time. For her final meal, Velma chose a simple snack of cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. She spent her last hours with family members and friends who visited her before her execution. Despite the circumstances, Velma remained calm and at peace. Velma was led to her execution wearing pink pajamas and medical devices attached to her chest, including a stethoscope and heart monitor. She was secured to a gurney with straps at her body and legs, and then wheeled to the execution chamber just before 2 a.m. outside the prison. 2 opposing groups of protesters had gathered. Pro-death penalty supporters were present, and anti-death penalty advocates, who criticized Governor Hunt for not showing compassion and claimed the woman could still contribute positively to society from behind bars. As the execution approached, other inmates demonstrated their anxiety by banging on the windows of their cells in unison. A group of about 80 people who supported capital punishment showed their approval through cheers and applause. 3 volunteers carried out the execution, with a dummy intravenous line ensuring that none knew for certain which of them had administered the fatal dose. Velma's execution took place at 2:15 a.m., just 15 minutes after being given the lethal injection of procan bromide. Those present at the execution reported that she passed away without any apparent suffering. Around 300 death penalty opponents stood nearby in silence, holding candles that they extinguished as the moment of her death approached. After the execution, Velma's body was taken by ambulance to a medical school for use in her previously expressed wish to donate her organs for transplantation. Her burial followed at a small North Carolina cemetery close to the gravesite of her first husband, Thomas Burke. She was 52 years old at the time of her death. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ronald Platt. July 28, 1996, began as a typical summer day in South England. Captain John Kopek and his son prepared for a fishing trip on their trawler, the Melcary. Despite an unsuccessful day, they decided to try their luck in a spot known as the Roughs. They lowered the net into the water and waited. The 2 men felt a tug on the net, indicating that it was a large catch. However, when they pulled the net up, they were shocked to find that it was not a fish, but instead a badly decomposed body of a man. Captain Kopek immediately contacted the Brixham Coast Guard to report the discovery. The body was in a state of severe decomposition, indicating that it had been in the ocean for some time. Fish had nibbled at parts of the body, but despite the decomposition, the man's clothing was intact: a long-sleeved shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. And there was no identification on the body. The only identifying features found on the dead man were a smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was taken to the medical examiner's office in Devon for further examination. It was estimated that the man was between 40 and 50 years old. A distinctive tattoo of a cluster of stars was found on his body. His only severe injury was a head wound, which was not fatal. This, combined with other bruising, suggested that he had been dragged along the seabed before being pulled into a boat. However, his lungs were filled with water, indicating that he had ultimately drowned. Police suspected that the man might have fallen overboard during a ferry crossing. The primary method for identifying him was through dental records, as they would be on file if he was a British citizen. However, this process would take some time. It was by chance that a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch, a Rolex Oyster self-winding model that was fully waterproof. The watch required regular motion to stay active and, as an original model, its ownership could potentially be traced. Police examined the watch found on the unidentified man and discovered a crucial clue. The calendar feature showed the date July 22nd, indicating that the man had likely drowned 2 days earlier, on July 20th, 1996. Further examination revealed a serial number hidden between the wristband and the watch face. Police sent this number to Rolex to verify its authenticity and determine who owned the watch. The mystery surrounding the man, now known as Rolex Man, gained further clues a few weeks later, after a records search identified the watch's owner as Ronald Joseph Platt. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman born in Calgary, Canada. His family later moved to Britain, where he grew up. Ronald remained unmarried and had served in the British Army as part of his national service. Those who knew him well described Ronald as a quiet and introverted man with a deep love for his native Canada. Ronald bought a Rolex watch in Germany in 1967, which became one of his most prized possessions. Ronald was so attached to the watch that, according to his former partners, he even wore it in the shower. Detective Constable Clenahan from the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case from the start. The police investigation revealed that Ronald's last known address was in Essex, which was hundreds of miles away from where his body was found. Clenahan contacted the Essex Police Department for assistance. Inspector Peter Redmond offered to visit the address to help with the investigation. When he visited the house, Peter found it vacant. Peter then contacted the owner and was told that the owner had moved out some time ago. However, Peter was provided with a letter of introduction that could assist in the investigation. The letter provided the address and contact details of a man named David Davis. Detective Peter called the number and got in touch with Davis. Before delivering the news, Peter asked Davis about his relationship with Ronald. Peter then informed Davis that a body had been found in Devon that was likely to be his friend. Davis agreed to meet with the police in Essex to discuss the matter further. When they met, Peter found Davis to be friendly and confident, but surprisingly calm, and asked very few questions about Ronald's death. Davis and Ronald had been friends for several years. Davis hadn't seen Ronald in over 3 months, and the last time they met, Davis had given him a loan to start an electrical business in France. Since then, Davis had assumed Ronald was living in France. During their conversation, Peter discovered that the symbol tattooed on Ronald's hand was a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. After providing all the necessary information, Davis left the station, assuring Detective Peter that he would send a photo of Ronald. The Essex police were then able to conclude their investigation, forming the theory that Ronald had fallen overboard and drowned in the channel. This theory aligned with Davis's account of the events, suggesting it was simply an unfortunate accident. With the Essex case over, Clenaghan had a problem on his end. He tried to contact Davis several times but was unsuccessful. Clenaghan then asked his colleague, Detective Peter of Essex, to help him contact Davis. Peter agreed and visited Davis at his home in Wooden Walter, a rural area of Essex with only 4 houses. They continued to describe Ronald to Peter, and he suddenly realized that the man they were describing was none other than the recently deceased Ronald Platt. This sudden revelation aroused Peter's suspicions, and he quickly contacted Clenaghan in Devon to share this surprising discovery. Police from both counties began to suspect that there was more to the case than initially appeared. Peter turned his attention to gathering information about the man impersonating his deceased friend. Peter visited an elderly couple, Frank and Aubrey, who shared with him the story of Ronald Platt, a young man with a wife and 2 young children. The couple mentioned that Ronald and his family frequently vacationed in Devon, where they owned a yacht, although they could not remember the name of the yacht. In Devon, Clenaghan reviewed the evidence and began reinterrogating old witnesses. His first was John Coppock, who revealed that when Ronald's body was found, a 10-pound anchor had also been pulled up in the net. John Coppock had given the anchor to a friend, who then passed it on to his mother to sell. Fortunately, the anchor had not yet been sold, allowing the police to retrieve it as evidence. Clenaghan's next step was to interview people who knew Ronald. He contacted Ronald's brother, Brian. Brian mentioned Elaine Boyes, Ronald's old friend of 13 years. Police then spoke with Elaine Boyes and discovered the connection between Ronald Platt and Davis. Elaine Boyes had met Davis in 1991 while working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She recalled Davis as being tall, engaging, and charming. During their conversation, Davis mentioned his plans to move to Yorkshire, and the topic turned to job opportunities. Davis offered Elaine Boyes a job at his company, but she declined, explaining that she and Ronald were planning to move to Canada soon. Davis offered to help Elaine Boyes and Ronald save money to move to Canada. Elaine Boyes soon became Davis's executive assistant, and she soon introduced Ronald to Davis. The 2 men quickly became close friends. Elaine Boyes and Ronald were fascinated by Davis's lavish stories and impressed by his lavish lifestyle. Davis then offered them a business opportunity, proposing that they become directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Although Elaine Boyes was initially hesitant, Davis explained that he wanted to keep a low profile due to his ex-wife, a wealthy doctor in New York, who allegedly still demanded alimony payments from him. By this point, Elaine Boyes and Ronald had developed a trust in Davis and believed that he was genuinely trying to protect her from his ex-wife. Davis sent both Elaine Boyes and Platt on business trips to Europe to negotiate deals on his behalf, gradually drawing them into his scheme. They transferred money to various offshore bank accounts without asking Davis what he intended to do with it, trusting him greatly because of his religious nature. On Christmas Day 1992, Davis invited Elaine Boyes and Ronald to visit Davis and his daughter, Noelle. After a sumptuous meal, they exchanged gifts. Elaine Boyes presented Davis with a card titled "The Greatest Gift Ever." In return, Davis gave the couple 2 plane tickets to Canada, provided they used them before February 1993. While Elaine Boyes was overwhelmed by the short notice, Ronald was overjoyed that his lifelong dream of returning to Canada had finally come true thanks to Davis. In preparation for their upcoming trip, Davis quickly made arrangements. To ensure he could effectively manage their affairs while they were away, he asked Elaine Boyes and Ronald to stamp their signatures and leave their driver's licenses with him in case they needed to prove their identity. Elaine Boyes and Ronald agreed, as they trusted Davis and were grateful for the new beginning he provided. Consequently, In February 1993, they left for Canada. However, the harsh winter conditions, lack of job opportunities, and resulting financial strain quickly put pressure on their relationship. Elaine Boyes and Ronald's relationship began to unravel due to increasing tension, ultimately causing them to drift apart. 5 months later, Elaine Boyes traveled to England to serve as a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, with no intention of returning to Canada. Davis, who had become a family friend, was also invited to the wedding. During the event, he spoke with Elaine Boyes and asked about Ronald. Upon learning that Elaine Boyes had ended her relationship with Ronald and would not be returning to Canada, Davis was upset. He attempted to persuade Elaine Boyes to give Ronald another chance, but she refused. Davis packed up his life, said goodbye to Elaine Boyes, and left her with his mobile number. However, their friendship eventually dissolved, and the phone calls ceased. Ronald and Elaine Boyes had lost contact. Ever since Elaine Boyes moved away from Canada, she had not heard from Ronald, her former lover, or Davis, who had been her best friend. So when Davis suddenly contacted Elaine Boyes in late 1996, their conversation was somewhat awkward. They barely exchanged any important information, and surprisingly, Davis did not even mention Ronald's name. The conversation was brief, and they did not keep in touch after that. He failed to tell her that Ronald was dead. After the interview, Elaine Boyes suspected Davis was involved in Ronald's death. Police needed more concrete evidence. They started questioning witnesses. Following the wedding in Harrogate, Davis quickly moved to Devon with his family. There, he introduced himself as Ronald Platt. He also introduced his pregnant daughter as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boyes. It was well known that Davis owned a yacht. Witnesses reported seeing Ronald and Davis together a month before Ronald's body was discovered. They claimed to have registered on Steam Packet as brothers, David and Ronald Platt. By this point, police knew Davis had lied about Ronald and his knowledge of Ronald's death. They needed one last piece of evidence to confirm their suspicions. Police analyzed mobile records and discovered that the calls made by Davis originated from the same area where the medical examiner believed Ronald had drowned. This led Essex police to plan a sting operation to arrest Davis on suspicion of Ronald's murder. The police were informed by Elaine Boyes that Davis had arranged to meet her for coffee at Chelmsford train station. The police arrived at the train station. However, Davis had escaped. Not giving up, Detective Peter decided to drive to the Davis family home. Pete called for backup. He speculated that Davis might be armed. As the police prepared to act, a taxi stopped at the entrance of the house, and Davis quickly escaped. The police promptly gave chase, and Davis was eventually caught and forced to surrender at gunpoint after Davis was arrested. Police took his fingerprints and submitted them to an international database. Albert Johnson Walker, a man on Interpol's wanted list and Canada's most wanted fugitive, was identified as the owner of the discovered prints. Albert Johnson's life story began in Canada. Born on August 9, 1945, in Hamilton, Ontario, Albert Johnson had big ambitions despite dropping out of high school. He had a charismatic presence. Albert Johnson met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. They married in 1968. The couple started a family early and had 7 children, 3 girls and 4 boys. Albert Johnson was born in Paris, Ontario, where he and his wife Barbara started a freelance accounting business. The business grew rapidly, and within a decade, it had expanded to 6 locations with more than 30 employees. However, Albert Johnson deceived his friends and clients by secretly transferring their investments to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Over time, Albert Johnson's dishonesty wasn't the only problem he faced. His marriage began to fall apart due to his many affairs. Furthermore, those he had stolen money from began to become suspicious. With his empire on the brink of collapse, Albert Johnson decided to go on the run in 1990. Under the pretext of taking his 15-year-old daughter Sheena on a skiing trip to Europe, Albert Johnson escaped. Barbara discovered the incident and, concerned for her daughter's safety, reported her missing. The police tracked Albert Johnson to London, but lost track of him. Albert Johnson assumed a new identity, stolen from a client. He now went by the name Davis Wallace, and his daughter Sheena changed her name to Noelle. Although he evaded the police, the name Davis linked him back to his real identity. Davis Wallace needed a new identity, and his opportunity came when he met Ronald Platt. Ronald had a strong interest in Canada. Davis used this information to his advantage and created a new identity for himself. However, his plans began to fall apart in 1995 when Ronald contacted him, saying that Ronald was frustrated with life in Canada and was moving back to Essex to be closer to Davis. This development posed a problem for Davis, as having two Ronald Platts with the same birth date in the same area would have raised suspicion. To solve this problem, Davis came up with a plan. He bought a yacht, the Lady Jane, and took his family and Ronald to Totnes and Devon to celebrate the launch. During this trip, Davis and Ronald purchased a new 10-pound anchor. Davis invited Ronald to Devon for the weekend to go fishing and enjoy the coast. Davis took Ronald to his boat, the Lady Jane, far enough from shore to avoid detection. Once alone, Davis hit Ronald over the head with the anchor, knocking him unconscious. Davis then searched Ronald's pockets for identification and retrieved it. Davis tied the anchor to Ronald's waist to weigh him down and threw him into the water, intending to make it look like an accident. However, Davis made the mistake of leaving Ronald's Rolex watch on his wrist, which was later used to foil the carefully planned crime and bring Davis to justice. Davis's trial began in 1998. During the trial, some key evidence was presented to the court. The anchor found in the net along with Ronald Platt's body. Forensic experts analyzed the wound on Ronald's head and determined that it matched the shape of the anchor. Further investigation found traces of zinc on Ronald's belt, which matched the zinc found on the anchor. It was discovered that the anchor had been attached to Ronald's belt to drown him in the sea. A search of the yacht, Lady Jane, also uncovered significant evidence. Hairs matching Ronald's were found on a cushion, and his fingerprint was discovered on the bag that had been used to carry the anchor back to the yacht. Additionally, blood was found near the rails, providing further evidence to the case. Davis's hoarding habits cost him, as documents were seized and used to prove his sham business ventures and his trail of deception. Elaine Boy's testimony provided evidence that Davis would lose a lot if Ronald Platt returned to England. And his daughter Sheena testified that Davis had been out on a yacht and looked disheveled and agitated when he returned later that day of the murder. Sheena also spoke candidly about life with Davis and how she was constantly harassed by her father and feared for her own safety. Supreme Court Justice Neil Butterfield said Davis was an extremely intelligent and ruthless individual who posed a threat to others. He stated that Davis's crimes were carefully planned and executed with precision. As a result, Davis was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. In 2005, he was allowed to move to Canada to serve his sentence. 2 years later, at the age of 61, Davis was given an additional 4-year sentence to be served concurrently. In 2015, Davis applied for parole but withdrew it at the last minute.